I need you more.
Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Night's Last Call. My name is Derek Melenda, welcoming you back to our Tuesday stream. And, yeah, my stupid chat overlay thing is not working again, and it's getting kind of annoying. And so yeah, I may not be able to call out your guys' chats, unfortunately, as I usually do, unless I can figure out how to fix it, midstream. So yeah, hey, what's going on, everybody? Hey, what's up, Jackal? Hey, what's up, Pulf? Alex, good to see you. GM Comfortable Gray is running a Dragonlance campaign. That's awesome. Alia's here. She says this should be an interesting one. I don't know much about Dragonlance, but I have a friend who loves it and hates how the setting has been left out to dry. The setting's been kind of through the ringer. I will admit I am not super up to date on the last 10 or 15 years of Dragonlance. So some of my information may be a bit dated. TK, that is correct. That is right. There is a big novel bundle going on right now. Good evening, Kalana. Dragonlance, Dragonstorm. It's all connected. That enchantment is terrible, Sunhawk. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Welcome, MCRP. Trevor says, one of the Dragonlance books is what got me started in TTRPGs. It caused me to get the second edition Quick Start Adventure, Eye of the Wyvern. I know the Eye of the Wyvern. I think there's another one called, like, Lair of the Minotaur, I think is the other one. But I remember those Quick Start Adventures, little pamphlets. That is actual sunlight behind me, Solana. Flem, good to see you. Sarek, fantastic. Excited to hear what sets apart everything and nothing. Jonas says, Dragonlance was a part of my foundational readings in fantasy, let alone D&D. Fantastic, fantastic. Era says, hello, will today's stream contain spoilers for the books? Not really, because we're not really going to be talking too much about the novels. I mean, we are going to be talking about the world, and we're going to be talking about, like, the, some of the impacts or effects of the world. So, spoiler alert, in the books, the good guys win. So I don't want to get, maybe there should be a brief spoiler warning here, but I'm not specifically going out of my way to talk about the elves. Now, why? Okay. I'm just wondering why my link isn't working. Must be something broken with the overlay. I like being able to call your chats out, people. It's one of my favorite things. No, that's not it. Nope. All right, well, I guess it's just not working. Sometimes YouTube like updates its like terms of service and everything breaks because they like to do that, and all those other fun things there. It's good stuff. All right. So today we're going to be talking about Dragonlance, and not just that. If we have time, we may even also cover a bit of how I primarily and principally played Dragonlance, which was through this. So this is the Dragonlance 5th Age dramatic adventure game that used the saga rules system, not D&D. And this came out in the late 90s, and it was a very big departure, and a lot of people hated it. This was the 4th edition of its time. Dragonlance fans, they hated the 5th Age. They hated the system. And so they hated both the novels part of it, and they also hated the game mechanics of it. But that was my primary, my primary introduction into Dragonlance, and so I have quite of a fondness for it. And we'll definitely get into it. So yeah, where to begin? Well, for starters, let's talk a little bit about the history of Dragonlance. And basically what Dragonlance was or is you had Tracy and Laura Hickman, and Tracy and Laura Hickman had written a number of modules for TSR as independent writers, right, as independent contractors. And some of these modules are very famous. Rahazia is one of them. Pharaoh is another. And of course, there's the one that everybody knows, Ravenloft. And they published these in the late 70s, early 80s. And then finally, Tracy Hickman and his wife got a job offer to come work for TSR. And so they packed up their things and they drove across the country to go work for TSR, circa, 1984 or something, 1983. And while they're driving across the country, they basically kind of spit out this idea that would become the world of Dragonlance. And their initial idea was this series of very cinematic modules that would have a very intense, focused, epic story. And when they got there, they found a very receptive TSR who had, definitely felt like their game had a lot of dungeons, but not as many dragons. And so this idea was born of a complete new idea for TSR, which was, let's do an entire end-to-end marketing campaign. Let's do modules, let's do a board game, and let's do, for the first time ever, books. The Dragonlance novels, which would eventually be sort of written by Tracy Hickman, but also they brought in a specialized novelist named Margaret Weiss, were TSR, aka the company that used to make Dungeons and Dragons, first foray into novels. And the idea was that the novels were going to be the novelization of the adventure modules. And as it was originally released, the module came out first, and about 6 months later, the novel came out. But the novels ended up being really, really popular, and the characters in them ended up being really, really, really popular. And so as they released these Dragonlance modules or adventures, they ended up eventually switching it, and the novels would come out first, and then the modules would come out second. And it actually got to the point where, you know, the original module, which we'll take a look at, the original module was written like a D&D module. But by the end of it, it was really written almost like with the idea that you were going to play these pre-generated characters from the books. And it became this kind of weird crossover. Now, Dragonlance is very, very famous from this adventure standpoint of having a very linear plot and really kind of driving home and kind of moving away from the let's just explore the dungeon and get treasure and level up and get loot. And so as a result of that, it was a very big departure for the tone of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, what I personally think, and what you'll see, I think, a lot in Dragonlance, is this was Tracy Hickman and the folks at TSR trying to do Tolkien, trying to do this epic high fantasy. D&D had principally and primarily been very low fantasy, very sword and sorcery, very Conan the Barbarian, right? Very John Carter of Mars. It was very, very, very gritty, and these characters were scoundrels. What you didn't have were these shining characters, these exemplars of paragons of good that you saw in Tolkien. Tolkien's world, you know, Legend of Lord of the Rings is pretty black and white. You have the good guys, you have the bad guys, you have the Dark Lord, you have the heroic heroes. And so Dragonlance, in my personal opinion, is basically a pretty ripped off version of Lord of the Rings. You know, right down to the fact that like Tanis Half-Elven is really just like a stand-in for Aragorn in his own way. You know, like a lot of these characters are very kind of taken out, I think, in my personal opinion. Sturm Brightblade is a kind of a stand-in sort of for Boromir, including to his demise. And so there's a lot of, you know, you even have like this focus on Kender as being kind of, you know, obviously hobbits and halflings were always part of the D&D game. But and even the world and the history of Dragonlance sort of speaks to or touches on a lot of tropes that we see from Tolkien. Now, of course, there are elements here that are very distinct and different, which is dragons are pretty predominant. You know, the only dragon we ever see in all of Tolkien's writings is Smaug. And although it wasn't originally meant to be, but you know, and the focus there was again on a campaign setting, quote unquote, based around dragons. But yeah, so that is sort of where Dragonlance came from. And originally, Dragonlance, let me hop over here. So originally, Dragonlance, this was the first thing that came out for Dragonlance. This is DL1, Dragonlance 1, Dragons of Despair. And this was the original adventure module. This is what came out before there was anything really about Dragonlance so much. You know, as a result, it's kind of stands out in that it's very, you know, doesn't really take place of anything. But there's a couple of interesting things right off the bat, which is kind of interesting for a game that you might think is all about dragons. So when this adventure, and we'll talk about the timeline of Dragonlance here in a second, but at the beginning of a Dragonlance campaign, clerical spells have not existed for 300 years. There is no divine magic. Dragonlance is well known for its gods and its pantheon. But at the beginning of Dragonlance, there were no gods. And then secondly, no dragons have existed in Krynn for over 1,000 years. As a result, when most people in the world smile when dragons are mentioned, believing them only to be folktales to frighten children. Few believe that dragons ever did exist, and almost nobody believes that they exist now. So, right off the rip, we have a D&D campaign world that is called Dragonlance, in which dragons aren't around, and which there is no clerics and there's no gods. So that is a very unusual and a very weird place to start. But then this adventure then, kind of kicks off. And one of the things that you'll see here as we kind of go through it. Now, remember, this module came out in I don't even know to tell us here, 1984. Okay. And when you read through this thing, you start to see stuff like let's take a look here. Dragonlance contains a story. Players generally will spend the first part of their play gathering information about their quest. This information will directly lead them to the sunken city of Zaxaroth, where the dungeon part of the adventure takes place. Right? And you can kind of see already this sort of kind of linear railroad. And you might read this and say, that doesn't sound that unusual. In 1984, this did. Because you didn't have this kind. Well, I mean, the idea here that this contains a story, that this was pre-written, and then as you get into the adventure, look at all this. Look at this. Look at all these boxed texts, right? This long, things, these pre-written, preset encounters, even to the point where it basically says, this is what the party's going to do. This is how the party's going to go. And it's really just, event into event, into event, into event, into event, event. It's very linear, for lack of a better word. It's taking you through this story with your characters. And, this was the kind of the beginning of the first time that we had seen this in the hobby. And obviously this didn't take off right away, but in a way, the original adventure path is correct. I keep wanting to click on things, but they are not. I forgot that they're not working, so I apologize again for that for the millionth time. And so so we start off with DL 1, but then eventually we get to DL 2, the Dragons of Flame, and DL 6, Dragons of Ice, and yada yada yada, and so on and so forth. And of course, one of the things that, in terms of an adventure path, this goes all the way to DL 14, which is the Dragons of Triumph. And behind it, we see what most people would call Tiamat, but back then we called Takesis, which we'll get into. And so Dragonlance was essentially, it started as a adventure path, for lack of a better word. And from that, it kind of grew and expanded into a world that people could play in. But really, for the first, I don't know, let's see, when did Dragons of Triumph? Dragons of Triumph was written in 1987. So for the first 3 years of Dragonlance's existence, it was just modules. There was really no world to play in. There was really no nothing to do. And now, boy, it is quite the day, folks. Now my computer mouse is yelling at me saying it's about to die because the battery has run out. And I don't know if I have a way to charge it. So that's cool. All right, well, I guess I'll deal with that later. And as a result, Dragonlance kind of was synonymous with the story of Dragonlance, which is, of course, the novels. Now, the original novels that came out were a series of they're typically called chronicles. They were Dragons of Autumn's Twilight, Dragons of Winter Night, and Dragons of Spring Dawning. There's sort of a fourth one there called Dragons of Summer Flame. But the original three are called the Chronicles series. And one of those, they're definitely for sale in the Humble Bundle. And that tells the story. Now, it's YA fantasy fiction at its best, right? The good guys are good. There's no like sex and drugs and violence. It's a very PG-13 rated, maybe even PG rated adventure. Remember, this is too coming out of a time when TSR was starting to move away from the dragons and the demons and the lowbrow stuff, and it was starting to become a little bit more mainstream. In fact, the Dragonlance novels kept TSR afloat for most of the 80s. I mean, they really did sell well. So I'm not really sure where, how or where we want to go from here, but I guess let me start off with some basic tropes or ideas about Dragonlance, and we'll pull up the whiteboard because why not? Alrighty. Okay. Whiteboard hype indeed. We gotta have a whiteboard around here somewhere. Whiteboard. These days I never know where it is. Okay. All right. There's our whiteboard. All right. Now, all right. So, Dragonlance, like I said, is based off of this idea, basically based off this very Tolkien-esque kind of concept. So, the idea of Krynn, from a historical perspective, is that you had this, all-powerful All-Father. Okay, what is known as the High God, and the High God is totally not Eru Ilúvatar, but it is totally Eru Ilúvatar. Why can't that be seen? Boy, I am a mess today. I'll be honest with you. I'm just kind of a mess in general. Okay, filter. Nope. Properties. Windows 10. There we go. All right. So the High God, who is totally not Eru Ilúvatar, and their opposite, which is chaos. Okay, basic mythology, and through the High God and through chaos, the High God sort of wins, if you will. And High God wants to create existence, and Chaos wants to sort of, lead to nothingness. And through their struggles, the world is born. And principally, and it's sort of an agreement. The High God and Chaos sort of create three tiers of gods. There are the gods of good, there are the gods of evil, and there are the gods of neutrality. Is this a D&D setting or what? And each of these pantheons of the good, neutral, and evil are led by sort of a primary god. And the good gods are led by Paladin. The evil gods are led by Takhisis, who's totally not Tiamat, and Paladin's totally not Bahamut. And the neutral gods are led by Gillian, or sometimes called Galeen. We always pronounced it Gillian, or I always pronounced it Gillian. And from this, the first age of the world of Krynn began, okay, which was called the Age of Starbirth. And there's a lot of stuff here that I could bore you with. Jesus Christ. Oh man, none of my settings are working today, and it is kind of driving me crazy. Use Windows Inc. Thank you. There we go. Okay. All right. There we go. So the Age of Starbirth begins, and basically what you have is they create the dragons, and then Takhisis turns them evil. Oh no, they're turned evil. It's so sad. And then, as sort of a, I'm sorry, the god that is the creator of like sort of the smith god named Reorx. That's the Reorx creates metallic dragons, and Paladine turns them into real dragons, and these are the good dragons. So now you have the good dragons and the evil dragons, and it starts a war, and it's called the All-Dragon War, and they're battling over all of this. And while this is happening, the gods are getting busy, and they're having other gods, and eventually there ends up being a total of 7 gods and goddesses in each of the 3 pantheons of good, evil, and neutrality. And we're not going to get into all of them. Hey, Psylop. I keep trying to click on people's messages. I apologize. It was nice meeting you too. So you have all these dragons, they're fighting, everything's going kind of, crazy, and it's a mess. And then the Dragon War, eventually, all these, the fighting gods and all this other stuff, eventually leads to this realization. I don't even know why I'm oh boy, this is not a good day. I'm like, what is going on with my computer? Why is nothing working? What is going on with my computer? Why is the handprint causing these things to happen? I don't even know what this is. That doesn't seem to be linked to the to the whiteboard. I can move this, but this random thing here, I don't know what that is. Okay. Let's try closing that and going back in. Maybe that'll work. Okay. So my buddy Rich is in chat, and he says I literally did try turning it off and turning it on, George. That worked. My buddy Rich is in chat, and he says it's the gypsy curse, and I know that's kind of a loaded term these days, but supposedly my family was cursed by Roma people when my grandmother was young, and it's with my father's recent passing, it appears to be in full effect, along with the fact that none of my things work here. Okay, so gods are being created, and things are getting out of hand, and then they discover that these stars that are up in the constellations in the universe are actually souls. Okay, they're spirits. It's basically pre-incarnate mortals. Well, that starts a whole new war, because now the gods of good, neutrality, and evil, right, are going to fight over who will control these souls. And this causes the, you guessed it, it's called the All Souls War. So now the gods and the goddesses are all fighting over the fate and the creation of basically the mortal races. And in the end, they, the high god intervenes and says, "Okay, stop it. We're calling it even. Everybody gets to do something to the mortal races." So the good gods decide to give these souls or these spirits physical forms. They give them bodies so that they can experience the world, and they can see all the sights that are to be seen. The evil gods give them ambition and greed, and basically all the sins. And then the neutral gods give them free will. And from this, the mortal races are born, and the gods of good create the elves. The gods of neutrality create the humans. And the gods of evil create, can you guess it in chat? If you actually know it, don't say it, because then that's cheating. But I'm just curious. If anybody who hasn't read Dragonlance, and doesn't know their Dragonlance history, guess what the evil gods created? Guess what Team Techhesis created? And I can't remember. They already created dragons. Dragons are already created. We'll see if anybody gets it. Z says the dwarves. No. Puppets. Close. Those are evil incarnate. Kender. No. Although that would be a good guess. Dwarves. Dragonborn. Nope. 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 Nope, not Draconians. We're about 4 ages too early. So Dragonlance doesn't really have orcs, to my knowledge. Not really. It doesn't have orcs, believe it or not. Halflings? Nope. Think bigger. Think bigger. I'll give you guys another minute. Minotaurs? No. No, we're not to Minotaurs. No. Giants. All right, we'll stop there. Close enough. Ogres. So there's Rob. There you go. Ogres. Rob Martinez. So yeah, elves, humans, and ogres. Now these aren't the ogres that we're used to. These aren't the brutish, hulking things. These are like these blue, purple-skinned, intelligent ogres who are very beautiful. They're powerful and strong, and they're full of ambition and drive. So they're evil in that regard. But they are a powerful race unto themselves. With kind of Oni looking. Yeah, I guess that would be kind of a good way to kind of maybe think about that. Kind of ogre mage-ish in that respect. Yes, Jonas calls them the Urda. Yeah, so eventually a tribe of ogres will leave as they become corrupted, and that tribe of ogres is called the Urda. Now, what we didn't really talk about while all this is kind of going on, and again, if I get some of my timeline wrong, I apologize. But this is basically the first age. This is the age of Starbirth, and as a result, basically this is from a Tolkien perspective, right? This is sort of the age when, the elves awaken at Lake Quevenian, and, the powers of the Valar are sort of, fighting with Morgoth over the right to, who will control these, and then the humans awaken. And so there again, you could see like a lot of the parallels there to the first age, or even the pre-ages of Tolkien's Legendarium. But this ends with the kind of the creation of the mortal races. Now, what we didn't really talk about is during this time, well, I'll get to that in a second. This group of human smiths might actually happen in the Age of Dreams. I'm not really sure, but someone creates a gem, and to try to capture chaos, or like to control chaos. And they kind of actually succeed too well, and they actually literally capture chaos, like the god, the ancient being from the beginning of time. And chaos is sort of trapped in a gem. That becomes important later. But one of the things that's really important to note about this setting is that this thing is basically like a hyper mutator, and wherever it goes, it sort of changes and makes things weird and change and freaks out. And so one of the original ideas of this is that there was a group of humans who were taught to become like expert smiths who knew all the secrets of the gods of creation, and they became too good, and as a result they were cursed and they became gnomes. But then this chaos gem came into contact with the gnomes, and the gnomes that were like very curious and crazy, I guess, became Kender, and the gnomes that were very industrious and well-meaning became dwarves. So in this setting, gnomes predate dwarves and Kender, and this is a good stopping off point to talk about some of these races. Gnomes in Dragonlance are not the sort of dwarf halfling hybrid that we think of, even though they beget Kender and dwarves. Gnomes in the Dragonlance setting are sort of cursed, because remember, they were humans who basically thought they were like better at creating things than the gods, and the gods cursed them. And so they're oftentimes referred to as tinker gnomes. And a tinker gnome basically is a harebrained scientist, who like builds contraptions, Rube Goldberg machines. Like they can't like sit still. He basically like, cursed the entire gnomish race with like OCD, ADHD, and as a result, their brilliance and their technological marvel has sort of become it consumes them. They're almost like so focused on building stuff and making weird contraptions that they can't really accomplish anything. So they're kind of a cursed race. And instead of being like these kind of like cheery people who kind of live in the holes in the ground, or these like weird fae creatures, which is kind of what they became later on, Tinker Gnomes are a lot more like the gnomes that you see in series like World of Warcraft, where the gnomes have this sort of steampunk empire with all these weird contraptions and, bellows and springs and sprockets. So it's very, very, EverQuest was the same way. And so those gnomish influences kind of came from Dragonlance, I think, because of this idea of what they were called Tinker Gnomes. And so they were very weird and strange, and they really couldn't sit still, and they couldn't actually stay focused on anything to like create anything super and special. So those are gnomes. Dwarves are dwarves. Fair enough. Kender. There are no halflings in Dragonlance. Instead, you have a race that is a totally legally distinct, totally not a halfling called the Kender. And the difference between a halfling and a Kender is that Kender are, they're still small sized, the size of a child, but they are a race that is just overwhelmed with curiosity. And they have a racial penchant for borrowing things. They are kind of almost viewed as sort of a childlike nuisance race. They never really take anything seriously. They steal things constantly, but they're not bad, right? Like they're very like childlike about it. Like, oh, I was just borrowing your dagger. I thought it looked nice. I was totally going to give it back. And they're not like really evil in any sort of stretch of the imagination. They're just really annoying because they almost have no sense of moral or ethical like meanings. But this has other advantages too, as Kalana says. They don't know any fear. Like they're so like, it's the most terrifying thing in the universe is in front of them. It's Cthulhu, and they're just like, oh wow, look at that thing. Oh, wow, that's great. How cool is that? Right? Like they're so annoying that they can't be frightened. They can't be like intimidated. Everything to them is kind of not a joke, but everything's kind of an adventure. Everything's kind of like a fun opportunity to to get out there and see the world. George says it very nicely: absurd innocence. Now, the reason I bring all this up is because Kender have a reputation for being oftentimes the most annoying possible character race to ever exist. Kender were famously encapsulated in the books in the character of Tasselhoff Burrfoot, who, obviously was kind of annoying. But as several people in chat are referring to, Rob says, I had a DM who outlawed Kender at his table. It was kind of like the perfect race to be if you wanted to be like annoying, and you're just like, I'm playing my character. Alia says, I've noticed that a lot of Dragonlance fans hate Kender. Some even go so far as to ban them from games because they're often used as this used to be a troll. Exactly. It is totally for that character who just like, whatever you do not push the button. And then you like look over and then they're like, I push the button. That is I'm just playing my character. So they're uniquely annoying. And even in AD&D first edition, which is when Dragonlance came out, in that very first Dragonlance adventure, you had the new race of Kender, and their power was that they were immune to fear, and they had a unique power called Taunt, which is basically that they could, this is back in 1982, people. People are like, oh my God, 4th edition is so like, wow, like with the freaking taunts and aggro mechanics. Like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Nope. 1982, Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax is still at TSR. Taunt. Any creature the Kender taunts must make a save versus spells or attack wildly at once for 1d10 rounds at -2 to hit at a +2 penalty to their armor class, trying to target the Kender. Kender are masters at enraging others by verbal abuse. there you go. 1982 character race ability, literally called Taunt. And as I've always said, everything that everybody hates that gets put into D&D because it came from a video game originally came from D&D. So yeah. Any case, that is our sort of the basis, you know, of our races and our characters here. And again, I'm not going to try to like explain every little element here, but we then enter the second age, the age of dreams. This is like a long age. I think this is like 6,000 years or something like that. And long story short, there's a lot of wars that happen. You know, there's like the first Dragon War and the second Dragon War and the third Dragon War, and all of these wars are basically Takhisis, okay, who is our evil goddess of evil dragons, is, you know, trying to conquer the world, and, you know, the people aren't having that. Now, it should be noted that I kind of forgot to mention this here. As part of sort of celebrating or commemorating the creation of elves, humans, and ogres, and the end of the All Souls War, where the gods of good, evil, and neutrality sort of agreed to disagree, each of the pantheons created a new god or goddess. And these three gods or goddesses were, I'll put it over here, good, neutral, evil. And these gods were Solinari, Lunatari, and Nuitari, or Nuitari. Now, what's important to note is that at the end of the age of Starbirth, the gods basically agreed to sort of go back into the heavens. The domain of the good gods in Krynn was called the Dome of Creation. The domain of the evil gods was called the Abyss. And I don't remember what the neutral god was called, like the Veil or something. It was woodland. It was like woodland, like. Anyways, but these three gods took it upon themselves, and they were created, and they were gods and goddesses of magic. And they decided, and rather than go to the Dome of Creation or to the Abyss with their fellow gods, they actually stayed in the world as moons. And thus, Solinari, Lunatari, and Nuitari are not only gods, they're also literally moons that orbit Krynn. And Solinari is a big white moon. Lunatari is a medium-sized red moon. And Nuitari is a tiny black moon, which you can really not see unless you're like an astronomer and you know where to look at for it, because it's literally a completely black moon, or when it crosses in front of one of the other moons. And as a result of this, and we'll kind of get into this, but the gods of Solinari, Lunatari, and Nuitari sort of took bodily form very temporarily. They went down into the world and they decided, we're going to teach these new mortal races, okay, these elves, humans, and ogres, magic, wizardry. And we're going to teach them the sort of rules and laws of wizardry. And one of the things that's kind of cool about Krynn, or if you want to call it that, is that wizardry is sort of this sort of sisterhood or brotherhood, and all wizards belong to it. So Solinari, who is the god of good, creates the order. I'm just going to put Order of the White Robes. And then Lunatari creates the Order of the Red Robes. And guess what Nuitari creates? That's right, the Order of the Black Robes. And basically, wizards are basically told, look, when you guys are at Hogwarts, which is like the magical schools, everybody here, if you're a wizard, your number one priority is to magic, bar none. And when you are here in one of our conclaves, one of our towers of high sorcery, you leave all that outside shit outside. It doesn't matter if someone's an evil wizard or a good wizard. You're all wizards. You're like wizards first. Now, outside, if you guys need to fight each other, if you need to kill each other, that's fine. But in here, we are all dedicated to magic, the preservation of magic, sanctity of magic, the advancement of magic. And this is so important that in the world of Krynn, if you want to learn wizardry, they'll let you learn a couple of spells. You can basically be an apprentice level mage. I don't know exactly what level it was, but I think it's like by 3rd level. If your character gets to 3rd level, they have a choice to make. They can either stop their studies, and basically they're fine with, everybody keeps, you can keep your 1st level spells and your 2nd level spell. But if you want to go beyond that, you have to go to the conclave, and you have to join the orders of sorcery, and you have to take what's called the test of high sorcery. And the test of high sorcery is literally a gauntlet. Then if you fail it, you are killed. Basically, if you are a mage, you are either part of one of these 3 orders, or you're very low level, like level 1 or level 2. You're like a hedge mage, an apprentice mage, or you are a renegade. And a renegade wizard is a wizard who has continued to learn magic outside of the conclave. And they are like hunted down. And even like a white robe and a red robe will team up with a black robe to bring a renegade wizard, right, to justice. Obviously, the black robes might take some more extreme measures, but they're all very much dedicated to the idea that this renegade wizard cannot be, and they want to sort of, take them out. So not only that, again, we're focused here on magic, but because these gods are because the magic is tied to the moons, who are the divine sort of gods of the divine gods of magic. As a result, magic, wizardly magic is cyclical. It follows the waning and waxing of your moon. And so when your moon is in sort of, basically when your moon is full, your magic is more powerful. When your moon is not full or is new, your magic is weakened. And so there's kind of a, for Krynn, there's all sorts of, let me see if I can find like a Krynn, a Dragonlance moon phase chart. Let's see if we have one real quick here. Believe it or not, there actually is one. This is insane. Okay, great. So open image, a new tab. Okay. All right. Big old chart. Okay. So this is the chart of the moon, and you can see that the black moon, Nuitari, orbits very, very quickly. It basically orbits every 9 days. The red moon, which is so the black moon's closest, the red moon is next closest. It orbits in a 28-day cycle, and Solinari, the white moon, orbits in a 36-day cycle. And so when your moon is full, it is called high sanction, and your magic is enhanced. And when your moon is new, it is called low sanction. In addition, there are conjunctions that occur, and what's pretty cool, I can't remember the exact name of it. It's called like conjunction of the eye or something like that, because when the 3 moons conjoin, you have the white moon with the red iris and the black pupil, right? Because it goes white, red, black, so it looks like an eye, and that's like that's like the day of the Sozin's comet, right? But like for all magic users, it's like this super powerful, kind of deal here. Actually, here this is kind of cool. Yeah, so like that's like an artist's representation, right, of the lunar eclipse. So of the different moons. Anyways, as a result, we're just talking about wizardry right now. I mean, there's other stuff to talk about, but we're kind of focused on the wizardry right now. And as a result of all of this, the white robes are obviously focused on, protection, healing, creation. The red robes are focused on like transmutation, illusion, right? Changing the substance and nature of things. And the black robes are things on like necromancy, destruction, fireball, energy, blowing stuff up, that kind of stuff. So each of the each of like the wizardry schools back, when we had wizardry schools, are sort of represented by each robe. And then even from like a game balance perspective, the white robes can become the most powerful, right? But it takes the longest to get there. So they're the most powerful, but it takes a long time. The black robes are not as powerful, but it's quick. And the red robes are sort of in between, but the red robes have the biggest range of spells that they can cast. So the red robes can dabble and take a little bit from here and a little bit from there. Sorrel, thank you for the $5 super chat. Champions of Krynn on the Commodore 64 with 5-minute save times for the win. Yeah, I remember having. I had a Commodore 64, but I don't know that I played. I think I played mostly with the. I think I played them on like the Amiga or something, the Commodore Amiga. But I definitely had some of those old Dragonlance games on some of the early systems as well. Yeah, it took a long time to save your game. George. Is the dark side stronger? No. Quicker, easier, more seductive. Right. I mean, again, I'm not trying to like pretend that this isn't what it is. Tracy Hickman just was like, Lord of the Rings is cool. Star Wars is cool. Let me steal this and put this into a campaign setting and call it Dragonlance. Dragons are cool. And so the white robes, the red robes, and the black robes sort of represented the magical tradition. And so magic is much more like a priesthood in Dragonlance than it is in any other setting. And as a result, it's very formalized. It's very, follows these paths. It follows these sort of, well-written and well-documented elements. So, where were we? Right, we've got the gray gem, we got that. Right, okay. So we're in the Age of Dreams. That's right. We were talking about magic. Okay, so second age, the Age of Dreams. So this is where the elves and the humans, right? We've got our elves, our humans, and our ogres. They start to become powerful. They start to build empires. We have some dragon wars. The first dragon war, the second dragon war, and this is all again Takhisis, who is the evil goddess of magic. She's trying to basically, take over the universe and sort of become the queen of everything, and doing what evil people generally do. Meanwhile, at the end of the Age of Dreams, we have the rise, of the birth of who is known as Huma Dragonbane. And Huma Dragonbane is a knight of Solamnia. So the Knights of Solamnia are sort of like the knighthood, the good guys, the shining knights in armor in Dragonlance. And they are seen as sort of the paragons of virtue. And they come from there's like a country called I think it's called Solamnia. But they become this, worldwide organization, and they are seen as sort of the paragons. And they are well known for what they follow what is called the Oath and the Measure. All right, the oath and the measure. And the oath, well, it used to be something that was well known in D&D circles, but maybe isn't as well known anymore. The oath is est, and I might get these spellings wrong here. Est Thularis Oath Mythos. And again, does anybody know what that means? Assuming you're not like a Dragonlance fanboy or fangirl, can anybody tell me? Has anyone even heard of that before? Est Thularis Oath Mythos. That is known as the oath. It is sort of the guiding principle of the Knights of Solamnia. Jonas says, yeah, and I won't spoil it. All right. We'll give it a few minutes. People probably don't know it, but back in the day, like I feel like everybody D&D character did it. But the measure is basically a massive codex of rules and regulation that basically, it's like a massive tome. It's like all these different law books basically of like how you're supposed to behave, what you should do in this situation. It's literally an entire catalog of rules and regulations for how you are supposed to behave as a knight. And Est Thularis Oath Mythos is my honor is my life. So this is sort of the motto. This is the oath of the Knights of Solamnia. So they were these like super duper heroic characters who were the good guys in all of these, especially as the Dragon Wars continued, and Takhisis, the evil god of dragon, was being evil and kind of being a pain in the butt. Now, at the end of the Age of Dreams, Huma Dragonbane, along with their companion, Kaz the Minotaur, and now we can kind of take a little stopgap here to talk about Minotaur. Minotaur are like a playable race in Dragonlance. So are centaurs. So we talked before, remember when Chaos was trapped in a bottle, right? Chaos was trapped in a magical gem called the Grey Gem of Gargarath. And where it went, it spread chaos and mutations and changes. And right, the Grey Gem of Gargarath was responsible for gnomes becoming kender and dwarves. Well, the Grey Gem of Gargarath was also responsible for ogres becoming minotaurs. And I should note that during this era, the Age of Dreams, as Takhisis continued, the ogres were becoming cursed for their cruelty, their arrogance. They're just generally being terrible people. Kind of like how you look on the inside kind of reflects how you are on the outside. So the ogres are gradually starting to sort of devolve into these kind of brutish, horde-like creatures. However, the Minotaurs retained their discipline, their strength, the intelligence that they had when they were originally created as these sort of like beautiful large creatures. But the Minotaurs ended up settling on some islands. And to be clear, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because I'm pretty sure that the Minotaurs have hooved feet in Dragonlance, but they become a naval power. So they become the preeminent sailing people. They're like raiders. They're basically kind of like Vikings. However, they have this gladiatorial strength and honor, very like Sparta or like Roman style of thinking about things. So think like Sparta or Roman culture, but then also think like Viking long ships, preeminent raiders and naval people, traders too, but generally seafaring cow people. And again, the hooves on a slick, to my knowledge, I don't think they have feet. I think they have hooves. And Ayla says, that is not what I would expect it from Minotaurs. No, it is not. But Dragonlance has some unique things that are, definitely stand out. And one of them, we talked about Kender, but we talked about gnomes, and Minotaurs are another one. So they are their own race. They kind of carve out their own niche. And they kind of maintain that through the rest of recorded history, if you will. But eventually, so they're not just like monsters. They are intelligent. They are naval masters. They have an honor-based culture, very warrior honor-based culture. Martial strength, gladiatorial combat. They have this sort of naval empire built around their island homes, and so not what you would typically think of this. Now. So Huma Dragonbane and Kaz the Minotaur, they go on a series of adventures, and they end up doing two things. One, so we talked about before, the first Dragon War, the second Dragon War. Well, guess what? There's the third Dragon War, and this one was for all the marbles. But we were losing. What are we going to do? Well, turns out if you get a magical Talk about Deus Ex Machina. Turns out if you get actually now we have a good modern day comparison for it. Bucky's metal arm from Marvel. Well, it turns out if you combine that, if you have an artificial arm and an artifact hammer, you can work together to create a weapon to try to finally beat the dragons. And they create the Dragonlance, the ultimate weapon to beat back the powers of Takhisis and her evil dragons. And so finally, the Dragonlance is created, and Huma Dragonbane and Kaz Minotaur, but Huma Dragonbane mostly, wield the Dragonlance. They go to war, they kick ass, and they eventually even defeat Takhisis, the evil goddess in her dragon form. They banish her right from the world, and the evil gods are defeated. They're driven from the world. The gods of or the evil dragons have been basically beaten back to within an inch of their life. So everybody, it's a big win. Humanity, good guys, everybody has won. The Knights of Solamnia are like the champions of the universe. Everyone is singing. Takhisis is banished. The dark goddess is gone. Let's kick off a third age. The Age of Might. And why shouldn't we have the Age of Might, right? We won, and everything's great. So the Age of Might is a fairly short age. I think it's only about 1,000-ish years. But the key thing to realize with the Age of Might is that in the absence of sort of the grand evil, turns out when there's not an evil goddess to worry about and fight against, people get uppity. There is. I'm going to draw a really terrible. So the world of Dragonlance is called Krynn. However, 99% of stuff. Good night, Voy. 99% of what happens in Dragonlance happens in a continent in the southern hemisphere called Ansalon. So most of everything that we know of happens in Ansalon. All right. So Ansalon, this is where we get into our Tolkien thing, by the way. Because remember, we're just Lord of the Rings, but kind of D&D'd up. So in the eastern part of Ansalon, a city and a country is formed called Ishtar. And Ishtar becomes this really powerful theocracy, right? Where because basically they're like, look, the god is good, the good gods beat, Takhisis is defeated, and eventually a ruling class of priests comes to power, led by, appropriately enough, someone named the King Priest. So the King Priests have this really, really, huge span of control, and they become increasingly kind of like Numenor. From, if you know your Lord of the Rings language, right? The Numenor were these like awesome, super awesome humans that had been blessed by the Valar, but they became arrogant and they became sort of driven by their own greed and hubris. And if Dragonlance has sort of a recurring theme, it's that the gods of good and neutrality and even evil, they're fine to create people, but once you become arrogant and kind of a unappreciative dick, they will punish you. And so as a result, the Ishtar rises as this really super powerful force. They force their worship onto everybody. You if you're not believer in the king priest's divinity, you're persecuted. Magic users are seen as devil worshippers and demon worshippers, and people begin to worship the king priest as a god. And finally, the final king priest is seeking divinity. He wants to, he thinks he's better than the gods themselves. Well, it turns out he's not. And the gods decide to end the Age of Might with something called the cataclysm. And they send a fiery meteor down from the heavens that smashes into Ishtar, literally wiping it off the map and sinking it to the bottom of the ocean, leaving behind a storm-racked, eternal, raging hurricane called the Maelstrom. The continent cracks and breaks. What was once sort of one solid continent becomes a sort of broken and ripped apart land. The sea flows into the inner part of the continent, creating a new inner sea. Lands are drowned. Deserts are ripped apart. The world is basically completely blown up as a result. And it's definitely not Numenor, right? Yes. Now, as a result of this, couple of things happen. One, the Age of Might has come to an end. Jacob says this is literally the story of Atlantis. They stole from everyone, Jacob. So that brings us to the Fourth Age. The Age of Despair. So let's do a quick checklist. 1, world, not the word, the world. Okay. The world is broken. Lands are torn apart and sundered and completely shattered. Number 2, the gods have peaced out. They basically say, you all are not worthy of our attention. Now remember, Takhisis had been banished. The evil gods had basically been forcibly banished, right? Takhisis has gotten destroyed or driven off of the plane of the world. She was driven deep into the abyss. So she wasn't really around during the Age of Might. But the gods of neutrality and the gods of good were, and they were like, deuces, you guys are dicks. You don't need us. You want to worship some, cult leader, type person? Fine. We're going to drop a meteor on your ass, and then we're going to leave you alone. So I guess they're kind of dicks, too, if you really think about it. But yeah, they peaced out. So they left. Civilization collapses. Now, was this the king priest's fault? Yes. Did the people blame the king priest? No. They blame the Knights of Solamnia. So the Knights of Solamnia become hated across the land. And basically the thought process here is, people were basically like, why didn't you stop them? Right? You are the defenders of you keep hearing Knights of Solamnia. But the Knights were seen as sort of the the people who should have stood up, who should have stopped this, the old order of glory that had failed the people, and even though it totally wasn't their fault, they were basically scapegoated, and people, blamed them for everything. And, people said that the knights had angered the gods, and that some people were even saying like, oh, the knights didn't worship the king priest. That's why we were punished. I mean, right, there was a lot of religious zealotry and stuff like that. A lot of people saw them as relics of a broken past, that their time was done. Long story short, the knights were hated and persecuted, and they were basically forced into exile or hiding, very, 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 very Jedi-like, in a way. They were sort of, driven back and driven off. So that is the beginning of the Age of Despair. Jason says, so were these paladins or just holier than normal knights? Jason, most of them I think were not paladins. Most of them were just, what we would call in D&D terms, a fighter. But yeah, they were, they just were knights that had a code of conduct. They were, fighters that had a code of conduct, who believed in the truth of what they were doing. I wouldn't necessarily say that they were paladins. So the world is shattered and everything sucks. The gods have noped out, and everybody's kind of left fending for themselves. So it's not a great time. Meanwhile, Takhisis, our evil goddess, has not been idle. Okay? In secret, she gathers her strength and her dragons. Now, they had lost, and there was no point for her dragons to make a big deal of things when, evil had gotten their, butt kicked, and they were just going to get killed. So the dragons have gone into hide. No one has seen a dragon in a long time, because remember, at the end of the third dragon war, most of the evil dragons got killed, and then their queen, their goddess, got banished to the abyss by Huma Dragonbane. And so during the Age of Might, the dragons were kind of nowhere to be seen, but they weren't completely eradicated. They were just laying low, laying in quiet, waiting for the right time to strike. Now it is the Age of Despair, and the gods have abandoned Krynn. So Takhisis knows the time is right. So she gathers her strength, her dragons. Additionally, her forces have kidnapped. I don't know if kidnap's the right term. I guess stolen. They have stolen the good dragons, the metallic dragons. They have stolen their eggs, and they are holding them hostage. And they basically tell the good dragons, hey, you all need to just stay out of this, or we'll destroy all your eggs. And so the good dragons are like, oh man, that's tough, Also, these people kind of suck anyways. All right, fine. We'll stay out of it. So the good dragons are blackmailed, because the forces of evil have sort of regained their or have gained their eggs and are using them as blackmail, using them as leverage. So Takhisis gathers her strength. She's got her evil dragons. She's got the kidnapped good dragons. So the good dragons are out of the picture. But then, she's the evil queen of evil. She lies. She actually doesn't. She does have the good dragon eggs, but she's not keeping them hostage. She destroys them. And she uses a magical ritual that births a new evil race from the good dragon eggs. These are called the Draconians. And maybe these were like the original dragon people. So a single ritual will corrupt a metallic dragon egg, and from it, it'll crack forth, and from it will, spill out hundreds or thousands of these spawn, and these spawn creatures will quickly grow up into this sort of dragon-like person called a Draconian. Each different type of egg creates a different type of Draconian. gold dragon eggs create Auroch draconians, which are like powerful spellcasters who can hurl magical energy. Silver dragon eggs are corrupted and become Sivak draconians, which are large, powerful dragons. They're the only draconians who can fly. They all have sort of vestigial wings, but only the Sivaks can fly. Copper dragons become Capac draconians, which are these poisonous assassin sneakies. And then bronze and brass become Boz draconians, and the other one I can never remember. I just don't really remember them. But bronze dragons, these Boz draconians, these are like the most common. These are the most frequent. These are like the foot soldiers of the dragon's army. Additionally, they all have a unique effect, as Chad is saying, when they die. So a Boz draconian, when they die, they turn to stone. So like if you stab them through the chest and that kills them, they turn to stone instantly, and they can your sword can be stuck in them. An Auroch draconian explodes. A Sivak draconian becomes their corpse becomes a clone of whoever or whatever killed them. So if you kill it basically looks like you. It like takes on your appearance. I think Capac draconians melt into a pool of acid. So basically she creates her. So she's got. Let's be clear here what Takhisis has got. Number one, she's regained her strength. Number two, the evil dragons, they're back. They're in hiding, but they're back. Number three, she's gotten the good dragons to stay out of everything. And then number four, she destroyed those eggs anyways, and she created her own personal army of evil draconian man dragon things to be her army. Then the last thing she does is she makes 5 big ass armies. These are called, appropriately enough, like the Red Dragon Army, the Blue Dragon Army, etc. Blue Dragon Army. And then each of them gets a leader, sort of a general, whatchamacallit, a ruler who is sort of in charge of the whole thing. And these creatures are called High Lords. So these are called the Dragon High Lords. And so Takhisis launches her war in about 325 AC, which stands for after cataclysm, of the Fourth Age, of the Age of Despair. And as a result, give or take, the evil, or maybe it's like 3. Let me actually check here. Yeah, okay. 348. 348. Brass is Boz. Bozak. I could never remember Bozak. Yeah, okay. They explode into bones. Okay, got it. They also explode. A lot of exploding. And then swap these. Thank you. So in 348 of the Fourth Age, for almost 350 years after the cataclysm, the dragon armies attack across Krynn. And this is it. This is going to be the end of civilization, right? The gods of good and neutrality are gone. Humans have no allies. The good gods of good are gone. The good dragons have been blackmailed. They're not around. The Knights of Solamnia basically don't exist. They've been pushed. They only have their one small area where they're sort of known. And thus enter the War of the Lance, which is totally not the War of the Ring. So the War of the Lance is basically what the first Dragonlance novels, the Chronicles, covers. And the War of the Lance details how a group of adventurers who are called the Companions of the Lance, kind of save the day. I'm not going to spoil things because I know maybe a lot of people might go out and get the Humble Bundle for all the books. But long story short, they bring back the good dragons. They recover. They rediscover the gods. They bring back divine magic. They bring back the good gods. They bring back the good dragons. They find the Dragonlances, and they help win and overthrow Takhisis' forces. And the good guys win. So, yay! Everything is good again. And everything has been done very well. So, that is the War of the Lance. And this is where you get characters that a lot of people might know from Dragonlance. This is where you get Raistlin Majere. You get Karaman Majere, his twin. Tasselhoff Burrfoot, Sturm Brightblade, Flint Fireforge. So all these characters were members of the Companion of the Lance, including, as we mentioned before, Tanis Half-Elven. So another interesting thing, as we kind of take a brief side tangent here, the elves in Dragonlance, they operate a little differently than we might normally expect. So the elves are sort of divided into, there's like 5 types of elves, but like really 2 types of elves. So you basically have the sea elves and the shoal elves, and these are basically elves that live underwater. And then you have the wild elves, who don't really live in either of the main elven kingdoms. But there's really 2 elven kingdoms, okay? There's one over on the east side of Krynn, and there's one over on the west side of Krynn, on the east side and the west side. And this is called Sylvanesti, and this is called Qualinesti. And just for what it's worth, these are called the Cargonesti. And then the shoal elves and the sea elves are called the Dermanesti and the Dargonesti. Anyways, these 3 kind of don't matter as much, but the Qualinesti and the Sylvanesti are like the 2 kingdoms of elves, and they don't necessarily get along that well. The Sylvanesti elves are like worthy of a whole thing in and of themselves, but basically they're kind of xenophobic. They don't really like anything else. They're like the typical super high flute flouting, everybody else sucks, everybody who isn't us is worse than us type elves, and they're really the worst. In many ways. The Qualinesti are a little bit more reasonable to deal with, but they have a lot of their own problems as well. And there's a lot of politics in the Elven kingdoms and a lot of problems in the Elven kingdoms. But one of the things that's kind of interesting about Dragonlance, we've talked about some of the changes, right? We talked about Minotaurs, we talked about Kender, is in Dragonlance, what is called a dark elf is not a drow. So there are no drow in dark elves. There are no drow in Dragonlance. So it is not a race. To be a dark elf is not a separate race. Instead, you are an outcast. You are basically banished from elvish society. You have done something that has caused them to basically kick you out of elven home. You are no longer a part of the Speaker of the Stars. You are no longer a part of the Speaker of the Sun. You have been sort of kicked out of the elven village, right? Of the tribe is spoken, and you've been kicked out. So usually it's because you're evil. You're power hungry. Because remember, the elves, theoretically, were created by the gods of good. So they're kind of supposed to be good. And so in Dragonlance, a dark elf is not actually a drow. And there are no drow in Dragonlance or in Krynn. So as a result, they are basically banished. And this is, by the way, considered to be like the ultimate punishment. It's a fate worse than death. You're completely severed from your people. And as a result, they usually become really evil. They're totally dark, dark magic, necromancy, assassins, warlocks. They seek revenge. They're bad guys. So dark elf is very much like a bad guy, but they're not drow. They're just, elves that got banished and aren't really nice. So that's elves. Dwarves are kind of dwarves. They're not really that different in Dragonlance, to be completely honest with you. They're kind of normal. Humans, the same thing. Okay. So that is our fourth age, the Age of Despair. And at this point, let me see if I have a map of Krynn. Yes, I do. It's kind of terrible, but that's all I got. Okay. So this is from DL16, The World of Krynn. So this is what Krynn looks like after. And by the way, this is just 2 pages. I know it's not really a good map. Maybe I can just find a good map. Map of Ansalon. So this is that continent I was talking about, Ansalon. Oh, that's very nice. Oh my gosh, this thing is huge. There we go. All right. Booyah. All right, much better. So this is our continent of Ansalon. And we can actually see a couple things here. So this used to be basically one whole world, right? One whole continent. However, this is where Ishtar used to be. This is where the mountain landed that wiped out everything. This used to be like the heart of humanity on Krynn, right? This used to be where everybody was getting along. And this is where the gods dropped a literal meteor onto the world, and it sank into the sea and is now a swirling maelstrom of death and destruction. Additionally, the inner part of the continent, right, ripped open, and the new sea flooded into it, and all these lands got flooded, all these bays. Urgoth and southern Urgoth got ripped apart and ripped away from the mainland and became their own sort of kingdoms. And again, as I pointed out before, northern areas of this are near the equator. So this is tropical up here all the way at the top. And the continent of Ansalon actually reaches all the way to basically the South Pole, where it kind of connects into the sea area. So the southern end of Ansalon is sort of, almost like Patagonia or really, really, really southern South America. And then the northern part is basically the top of South America. And so you have a bunch of different areas that are all over here. So we mentioned before the 2 kingdoms of the elves. So here on the west side of Ansalon, you have the Qualinesti, who live in their forest. And then over here on the east side, you have Sylvanesti, who live on the eastern side of the continent. And then in between, there's all sorts of different kingdoms and things. But I should point out that during this time frame, we're talking about the Age of Despair, right? The 4th age. There really are very few what I would call political entities in creation or in existence. Everything is city-state, tribal. This is a post-apocalyptic world. There's very few kingdoms and very few lands that didn't get basically completely shit on. One of the few that actually managed to sort of survive fairly well would be like Solamnia, and their capital city here of Palanthus. But remember that people hated them and viewed them as like responsible for all the terrible things. So their influence was basically, close to next to nothing. So most lands basically sunk into tribalism and small regional fiefdoms and warlords and, city-state type things. There was very little, there were very few proper kingdoms that remained after the cataclysm. And even when the War of the Lance occurred, 350 years later, most of the lands were pretty not in a good shape. So yeah, so this is the world. This is the continent of Ansalon, circa 348 AC, during the War of the Lance. And from here, we take a turn that some people are not happy with. Long story short. Now I'm going to tell it to you from the perspective of the people who are playing the game at this time. By the way, I do want to take another quick side tangent here to talk more about Lord of the Rings. So, during the Age of Despair, when the gods had abandoned the Krynn, well, Paladin, remember, he's the great over-god who is the king or the head of the good pantheon. I mean, if you're the king of the good pantheon, are you really going to just completely abandon the people? No. So even though they had abandoned the people in technicality, the god of good could not help himself. And he had to show up occasionally to give people advice, to send them on adventures, to make sure that evil couldn't win. But he couldn't go down as Paladin because that would defeat the whole point. So he had an alter ego that he roamed the lands of Krynn as in order to spread the good word. And he appeared in the form of a doddering old mage who is totally not Gandalf. I say again, totally not Gandalf. But he's Gandalf. So this is Fizban the Fabulous. This is the sort of secret identity of the god of good, Paladin, in the mortal plane, and he very much sort of acted as sort of a Gandalf figure, where he didn't do anything directly. He just sort of heavily influenced and pushed people in the right direction, because at the end of the day, Paladin, the god of good, did not want to abandon the people and let everybody suffer and die for their fate, but he also knew that they had to kind of do this on their own. So he came in the form of Fizban the Fabulous. Now at this point, Elminster also comes into mind. The reason, I bring up Gandalf mostly because Gandalf was a divine agent, right, who was sent by the Valar to overcome the evil of Sauron. Now, I should also point out at this point some of the incredible art that came out of Dragonlance. And some of the art for Dragonlance, I mean, this is peak TSR era art. This is Elmore. This is Jeff Easley. This is Keith Parkinson. I mean, some of these icons are some of the most recognizable from this era, of time and place. So, things like the death of Sturm Brightblade at the High Claris Tower. I mean, this is considered one of the most iconic images, of the D&D era of the, let's call it the 80s and probably even into the 90s. Characters like Kitiara Uthmatar and Lord Soth. And I'm kind of skipping Lord Soth, I know, but even though he's a really cool character, we can talk about him. But I really want to highlight for me, let's see, Keith, what I consider to be one of the piece of artwork from Dragonlance. Okay. And that is this piece. This is called the Flying Citadel. This is, so during the War of the Lance, the evil dragon armies literally used powerful magic to rip castles out of the earth and fly them around as sort of flying aircraft carriers for their contingents of flying evil dragons that then, fled across the land. This is what I talk about when I talk about Dragonlance being epic high fantasy. This is very different from Lord of the Rings, where magic is very subdued and, it's mostly just people versus people. This is Dragonlance. This is big stakes. This is good versus evil. This is flying castles and wheeling dragons and heroic knights wielding magical artifact lances from the backs of good dragons fighting into battle against armies of draconians, right? This is D&D epic high fantasy. This is Lord of the Rings turned to 11. The magic is very in your face. It's very powerful. And as a kid, I love Lord of the Rings, but Lord of the Rings there's a subtlety to it, right? It's not so over the top. It's not so in your face. And Dragonlance was. And it was, it was big. It was bold. And the art of Elmore and Eastleigh and Parkinson, just for me, just sold the whole world to me. Now, none of this is, I wasn't playing for any of this. This is all stuff that happened, that I came to later. And in particular, what happens, and again, this is some people don't like this, but that's okay. So the heroes win the war of the Lance, and the people celebrate and rejoice. And about 20 or 30 years later comes what's known as the Summer of Chaos. The Summer of Chaos. Well, this is detailed in a book called The Dragons of Summer Flame. It is set like 20 years later, after the original Dragonlance series. Long story short, remember that gem that we talked about from long ago that was created near the birth of the world that contained chaos? Long story short, it kind of, breaks free. This guy named Barum gets the gem, and there's a whole thing, and then chaos is going to become free, and the new generation of people have to rise up and fight all the, off of the powers of evil, or powers of chaos. And again, I don't want to spoil too much here, but they succeed. But as part of them succeeding, is part of the victory, right? No victory comes without a cost. The gods are forced to basically abandon the world. You're noticing an ongoing theme here. The gods have to abandon the world. Now, again, I'm going based off of what was known at the time. Some of this information would kind of later be retcon / change / it was a fake all the time. But in order to save the world, the gods basically are forced to abandon it. And so the gods step away from Krynn, this time not of their own accord, but in order to save it from the collapsing power of chaos. And we enter the 5th age of Krynn, which is called the Age of Mortals. And one of the defining things, right before the gods leave, Fizban, Paladin in the form of Fizban, tells the heroes that all the gods are leaving, including the gods of magic. The moons are no longer in the sky. And they basically say, so is that it? And the gods tell them, you'll have to look within yourself and within the world itself to find a new magic. You're on your own. And they leave. And the mortal races are left their world for the first time all to their own. And thus starts my journey with Dragonlance. And that is Dragonlance, 5th Age, dramatic, out of focus, dramatic adventure game. And this is where I joined the story. So the idea of the Age of Mortals was that the gods have, again, abandoned Krynn. And as part of that, and some of this was marketing. You know, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, I don't know if they were trying to, like, change the world so that they could, like, sell a new game. But long story short, everything that kind of made Krynn kind of went away. The gods, the whole Towers of Magic thing, the gods of magic. And because D&D was basically synonymous with the way that old Dragonlance was, this new Dragonlance couldn't be done with just D&D. And so in circa 1996, 1997, this game came out. Let me see if it says this on the back here. 96. So 1996, this game comes out. And this box set is a brand new game that uses a game system that TSR would generate. That they actually made 2 games for this. They made Dragonlance 5th Age, and then they also made a Marvel superhero games that uses what's called the saga system. And what defines the saga system? Well, I'm glad you asked. What defines the saga system is the Fate deck. Fate deck. That was me being dramatic. The Fate deck. And instead of using cards, or I'm sorry, instead of using dice, Dragonlance, the 5th Age system, uses cards. So instead of dice, it uses cards. And it uses a deck of cards that has 9 suits of various numbers from 1 to 9. And you use these to make your character. You use these to take actions in the game. And we played this game pretty much exclusively from, I mean, we played Earth Dawn, we played a couple other systems, but we basically gave up D&D once this game came out. And we played this pretty much straight until 3rd edition D&D. So what I figure I'll do here, because it's 8:45, is talk a little bit about Dragonlance 5th Age, the system, how it generically worked, and then maybe we can, like, make a character here. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to talk about Dragonlance. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of novels. There's so many novels. I don't know all of the history completely myself, but, you know, it is that. By the way, if you're wondering what's wrong with my hand, as I said before, my dog and my foster dog got into a fight. My dog attacked the foster dog. Yes, my 30-pound dog attacked the 80-pound foster dog, and we had to break it up. And they didn't, like, bite me, but, you know, when you're trying to break up a dog fight, you get nicked. So I got kind of nicked a little bit. That's why my hands are all messed up. So the general premise of the Dragonlance card game, or sorry, the Dragonlance adventure game. I don't know how good this is. Let me go to here. Well, actually, let me bring up our PDF viewer. Yeah, true story. I was at the pet ER because, again, my dog, 30-pound, 11-year-old dog, my dog, was fine. The 80-pound pit mix 2-year-old had gotten his lip ripped open from my dog. So I had to take this foster dog to the pet emergency room at like 1 or 2 in the morning. And I was sitting there. I had just paid $1,500, $1,500, to have a dog who is not mine to get its mouth sutured up and anesthesia. Meanwhile, my hand was bit up and it looked worse, obviously, a couple days ago. And then while I was sitting there in the emergency room waiting for the dog, who is not mine, to get out of surgery, my mom called me and told me my dad died. So that was what we call a bad night. So this is the rule book for Dragonlance 5th Age. This is book 1. This is all the rules. There is a book 2, which contains information about Krynn and Ansalon, and the world. But this is everything. This is the whole shebang for the entire game. So it's very, very lightweight. So I do want to bring up the PDF viewer, though. Bloop, here we go. So this is the back of the book is the character sheet. So that I'm just bringing up the PDF so we can actually take a little bit closer look at it. This is it. This is there's no back page to it, right? That's just the idea is that you photocopy the back of your book to make your character sheet. So I'm just going to bring that up on the PDF so we can get a closer look at it, so you can kind of describe what's going on with this. So this is 5th age. So we start with our hero's name, our race, and role. There's no class. And the game actually encourages you. In fact, actually, the game itself does not come with any roles. The game encourages you to make up your own role. Now, at the time, this felt revolutionary. But, you know, in Fabula Ultimate terms, we would just say it's like creating your identity. Who are you? What are you? And the game would have a number of expansions that would come out. Heroes of Steel, Heroes of Defiance, Heroes of Sorcery, Heroes of the Heart. And they would contain, like, 5 to 10 example roles. But the long and the short of it was your class really didn't do a whole lot. Your role didn't do a whole lot. You then had what was called a demeanor and a nature. We'll get to that when we make character sheets. But basically, part of the character creation process, part of using these cards, you actually assign a adjective to your character about what are you like on the outside? Like how do you present yourself? What is your demeanor? And how do you really feel? How do you act on the inside? Like what are your true beliefs? What are your nature? In Legend of the Five Rings term, we might say, what is your giri and what is your ninjo? Then we have our basic distinguishing stuff, age, hair, height, weight, stuff like that. Then we get into our background. Where are we from? What's our social status, our reputation? And then we get these little unique things here: hand, wealth, and quests. So hand is, quite frankly, how many cards we have in our hand, because it's not, you actually have, while you're playing, a hand of cards. And the more quests that you've been on, the more cards in your hand. So basically, hand size is kind of like level, right? As you get higher level, you'll have more cards in your hand. Pretty simple. So now the quest, though, it is kind of exponential. Like to go from like 3 cards to 4 cards is pretty simple. To go from 4 cards to 5 cards takes a couple more quests. To go from 5 cards to 6 cards takes a lot of quests, etc., etc., etc. Then we write down our special abilities and limitations. Again, this is usually from your role. And then we have the 8 ability scores. There is agility, dexterity, endurance, strength, reason, perception, spirit, and presence. And you'll notice that each of these ability scores is tied to a suit of cards. Okay, I'm going to scroll down here. So this is an example of the cards. So a card has a suit and a value. So for example, the 5 of swords, or the 5 of helms, or the 5 of arrows, or the 4 of moons, the 4 of hearts, the 4 of shields, etc., etc., etc. So on your character sheet, when you are making an agility action, the suit that matters is shields. So ability scores are rated from 1 to 9. And we'll get to the ABCDX thing in a second, but agility covers, your ability to dodge, your ability to do things acrobatically. Dexterity covers your ability to do, fine, dexterous work, fine motor control. Dexterity is also used to shoot missile weapons. And, turns out, agility is used to dodge missile attacks. So they're kind of paired off in that way. I should note that agility and dexterity are both under the headline of coordination. The only reason that this is important is that because NPCs and monsters do not have 8 ability scores. Monsters and NPCs have 4 ability scores. Instead of having an agility and a dexterity, they just have a single score called coordination, or CO. Instead of reason and perception, they have a single ability score called intellect, IN. Instead of endurance and strength, they have a physique, PH, and instead of a spirit and presence, they have essence, ES. So basically, NPCs and monsters are a little bit simpler than a PC. So, a dexterity and agility are kind of bodily coordination and hand-eye coordination. And dexterity is used to shoot missile weapons. Agility is used to defend against missile weapons. So right off the bat, we should talk about that because the GM does not have a hand of cards. So this is, if you want to know why Derek loves player-facing only roles, it is because of this game. As the GM in this game, I did nothing. Everything is player-facing. So when a player attacks a monster, the player is making a dexterity action. When my monster is shooting at my player character, or my NPC is shooting at a player character, the player character is making an agility action to avoid the blow. So everything is player-facing in the 5th Age saga system. Next is endurance and strength. By the way, agility is the suit of shields. Dexterity is the suit of arrows. Endurance and strength kind of work similarly to agility and dexterity. Endurance is the your ability to be tough, stamina, take hits. Strength is raw physical power. Strength is also used to make melee attacks, and endurance is used to resist melee attacks when you are attacked. Then we have intellect and essence. We have reason and perception, spirit and presence. So now we get to why another thing about this system that is very, very unique. So when the gods left before the age of mortals, they told them you must look within. The real magic was within all time. Well, it turns out that Krynn, the world, was created by divine beings. And so wizardry was this idea of using complex formulas and pre-written, notations, aka spells, in order to, draw magic from the gods and create magical effects. But when the gods left, what Palin Majere, who is the son of Caramon Majere and Tika Waylain Majere, what Palin Majere was able to realize is that the planet itself has a form of latent magic. And now this isn't the magic of the orders of the white robes or the red robes or the black robes, where it's so divided into different schools of evil and good. It doesn't have that kind of moral touch point. Nor is it bound by the sort of rote construction of very specific spells that do very specific things, aka Vancian slot-based predefined magic. No, this new magic, which he called sorcery, was a very free-form magic where you drew upon the energy of the world itself around you in order to create magic effects. Similarly, Goldmoon, who actually was an original member of the Companions of the Lands, discovered similarly that same magical spark that existed inside of the world, because the world was created by the gods, she discovered a similar magical spark inside every mortal creature, because the mortal creatures of the world were also created by the gods. And so this other form of magic, if you could think of the one as being external, tied to the world, the other were tied to the very living magic of mortal creatures. And this was called mysticism. And so in the Dragonlance 5th Age Saga adventure system, there are two forms of magic: sorcery and mysticism. And in the game, reason is obviously your ability to, think and reason. But it is also the ability score that is used for the sorcery system. Perception, pretty self-explanatory, but perception is also used to counter any magical attacks that are thrown against you. And lastly, we have spirit and presence. Spirit, the suit of hearts. Oh, by the way, suit of moons is reason. The suit of orbs is perception. And then the suit of hearts is spirit, and the suit of crowns is presence. Spirit is, how big is your spirit? How much do you care? Presence is your charisma, your ability to lead and have faith in your own self. Spirit is the ability score of mysticism, and presence is the way that you would resist a mystical attack. And then we have, remember, there's no back seat to this character sheet. Then we have your missile weapon, your melee weapon, your armor, and your shield. Melee weapons and missile damage weapons, the damage is not random. It is simply rated from +1 to +9. A big two-handed massive sword has a damage rating of like +9. A small dagger has a magic damage rating of +1. Armor and shields work like damage reduction. So, armor might take off 4 points of damage. A shield might take off 2 points of damage. So in total, you have 6 points of damage taken off every time you get hit. And that's almost it. I said that the last thing I want to talk about with the character sheet are the ABCDX. ABCDX represent your proficiencies. So if you are very proficient, you will, like an expert, a master, you will have an A level proficiency in that stat. If you know almost nothing, you will have an X. If you know just a little bit, barely a little bit, you're a novice, you have a D. If you're somewhat good, you'll have a C. If you're a master, you'll have a B. And if you're a grandmaster, you'll have an A. So what does this affect? Well, it affects the game's proficiencies. Agility, the suit of shields, is obviously your ability to dodge missile attacks, and it's also your ability to do acrobatic stuff. But the proficiency of agility determines your proficiency with shields. So someone who has an agility of A, ranking of A, can use any shield in the game. A person with an agility ranking of X can't use any shield at all. Similarly, dexterity, the suit of arrows, the proficiency, A, B, C, D, X, determines how proficient you are with ranged weapons. A ranked dexterity means you can use any ranged weapon in the game. And X means you can't use any. Endurance, the suit of helms, determines your armor proficiency. Can you use heavy armor, the best armor, or can you use no armor? A, B, C, D, X. Strength, suit of swords. What missile or what melee weapons can you use? If you have an A, you can use any melee weapon in the game. X, you can't use any. Reason and spirit stand out as special. Reason and spirit basically determine, can your character use sorcery or mysticism? If your character has an A or B rating in reason, they can use sorcery. If your character has an A or B rating in spirit, they can use mysticism. Perception and presence determine the proficiency rating there is a little softer. The proficiency rating of perception determines, do you have any enhanced senses or do you have any deficient senses? A character with a perception rating of A might have really keen eyesight and keen hearing. Presence determines basically your ability to lead. If presence is your sort of natural charisma, the proficiency is actually your like actual ability to lead people. You know, think of it as like the number of hirelings and the number of men at arms that you could lead into armor or lead into battle. So that is the character sheet. And that is basically the system. Now, how does this system work? Well, let's say that let's see if you guys can see this here. I'm just going to use this piece of paper here. So let's say that our character had an agility of 5. So the GM is describing something, and like I'm describing that you're in Solace, you're up in one of the tree cities, and the dragon army is attacking, and you're like, okay, I'm going to leap off of one of the tree platforms, grab that rope, and swing over to the other tree platform. And I go, great, make an agility check. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to what you're describing, and then I'm going to determine what the difficulty rating is of this action. Now, because it uses cards, which are deterministic, right? Like if you play, there's no rolling a die. So if you play an 8, you know that you have an 8. So the game is encouraging you to make the difficulty ratings secret. Because if you knew that the difficulty rating was 12, then you would know exactly what card you need to play. So the idea is that the GM is encouraged to sort of describe how difficult the attempt seems without giving away, the full description. And the difficulty ratings are easy, which is a 4, average, which is an 8, challenging, which is a 12, daunting, which is a 16, and impossible, which is a 20. So let's say I describe, I'm like, it's a really long jump. The rope is dangling out in the middle of nowhere, and it looks, and everything's on fire. So the player goes, okay. And I say, make an agility check. So the player, I'm going to shuffle here. The player is going to have a hand of cards, right? So if our player has, let's say, a hand of 4 cards, so this is our player's hand. They have a 5 of moons, a 2 of arrows, a 7 of moons, and a 6 of hearts. Their agility is 5. So that means whatever card I play is going to be added to 5, and that's my total number. So as a player, you know that the difficulty ratings are 4, 8, 12, 16, or 20. So basically, as a player, I have to think to myself, okay, that sounds pretty tough. Do I think that this is an 8? Do I think that this is a 12? If it's a 12, but I don't know for sure. If it's a 12, then I need to play a 7, because a 7 plus my 5 would give me a 12, and I would win. If I thought it was an 8, well, I wouldn't want to play my 2, because that's only 7, so I wouldn't succeed. So at that point, if I thought it was an 8, I wouldn't want to play my 7, because that's overdoing it, right? Why waste the 7? The 7's a good number. Like I said, these numbers, these cards, they go from 1 to 9. So that's the lowest, that's the highest. So a 7 is pretty good. So if that's the case, if I thought it was an 8, then I would want to play one of these two and overdo it. And then which suit I play depends on my type of character I'm having. Now, this is where the hand becomes a little bit more interesting. Let's say I think it is 12. But instead of this card, I have this card. Now, from the GM's description, I think it's a 12. And I also really want to pass this. So even if it is an 8, I really want to make sure I pass it. So if I think it's a 12, I could play my 7. However, this is an agility action. And we know from our character sheet, and just from playing the game a million bajillion times, that agility is the suit of shields. This is the suit of shields. And that means, because this is an agility action, the suit of shields is trump. As in, like, playing card game trump, like euchre. When you play a card which matches the suit of the action that you're taking, that suit is trump, and you get to flip over the top card of the deck and add it to whatever card you played. If that suit is still trump, you get to flip again. And then add all these up. And then when you play a card from your hand, you also get to draw a card from your hand back. So then we would draw a new card. Oh, look at that bad boy. We get to draw a new card so that we're back to 4. So now we have a 5 agility. We have a 3, a 1, and a 9. So we've played 13 points of agility. Plus our 5 agility means that we actually got an 18. So not only did we beat a 12, we would have beat a 16. So, the peasants rejoice. And this trump component is kind of what makes the game exciting and fun, because it adds a little bit of a random element to it. It also means that what's in your hand can kind of vary greatly. Like if you have a 9 of agility in your hand, doing an agility action, you're capable of some super heroics, because you're going to play a 9. So I'm already at a 14, and then I get to flip a card. Okay, well that kind of was disappointing, and I only got to flip a 1. But imagine if like you've played the 9, and then you played, you flipped over the 3, and then you flipped over the top of the card and it was a 7. So now I've added 19 to my 5. I've got a 24. So I would have been able to accomplish an impossible task, right? Something just absolutely crazy. Hey, Boothby, thank you.
Boothby tipped $10. Love Dragonlance. For the record, Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, Jean Rabe, Janet Pack, et al. Amazing people, got to hang with them at Gen Con once. Kind and generous, everything you would want from childhood hero authors.
I have several books signed by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, and I did also get to meet Jean Rabe. Jean Rabe wrote a lot of the Age of Mortals novels in the beginning of the Fifth Age, so I'm very familiar with her work. Thank you, Boothby. Yeah, it's again, the stories here, they're not complex. I mean, there's some characters that have a little bit complex, of complexities to them, but I mean, it is fundamentally good and evil. The characters, aren't super flawed. They don't have these kind of morally ambiguous moments. It's really about good guys doing good things. And it's really a sort of a simpler time, if you will. So thank you. Boothby says Jean Rabe wrote me an amazingly nice rejection letter for a story collection she headed. Oh, that's very nice, I guess. So that's how the action system of this game works. So you'll have a hand of cards, and of course, as the game goes on, you're going to look for strategic times. This is obviously a low card. So if we're in a do or die or critical moment, probably don't want to play this card. But if it's something that I know is a low DC, or maybe I have a really high, like maybe my character has a dexterity of 8, or well, I guess this is a dexterity card, and I'm attempting first aid, and I know first aid is a DC of 8 every time, then I might play this just so that, I successfully give one of my companions first aid, and then I get to add a new card to my hand, which is a little bit better. It's a 4. Also, the quality of the cards is going to matter a lot more depending on what kind of caster you are. If you're a spellcaster, if you're a sorcery caster, well, sorcery uses moons. So you're going to want moon cards in your hand. Whereas if you are a melee combatant, you're going to want, we would have been shit out of luck. We're not getting any swords. If we're a melee combatant, right, we're going to want suits of swords, because if we have a lot of swords in our hand, that means we're going to be able to get some really big numbers in a melee combat. So, and this, what's in your hand when you make your decision when you go into combat or when you go into an encounter. Now, as I said before, let me see if I can pull up the PDF again. I don't even know. I think, did my mouse die? Yeah, my mouse died. You can't make this up, people. And the problem is my mouse is kind of old, and every single thing I own these days is USB-C, but my mouse uses whatever. The old one, the micro USB hub thing. All right, give me 1 second. All right. I have to plug in my frickin' mouse, which is just what you want when you're... Okay. Hey, I got a mouse again. Okay, so going back to the... Nope. Nope. So going back to the character sheet, so here are some examples of what, standard actions would be. You can see that, like, breaking a code might be a average 8 reason action. Breaking down a simple door could be a average strength action. Building something intricate could be a daunting dexterity action, and so on and so forth. So this is just an example of what you would do, but there is no, a lot of it's just up to the GM, and you're just kind of, making a call and going for it. As for the armor and weapons, so as I said before, depending on what proficiency you are, depends on what kind of weapon you could use. So if you are super proficient with swords, you could use a great sword, and the damage rating of that is +9. Whereas the damage rating of a great bow or heavy crossbow is +7 or +8. And the way damage works in this game is pretty basic and pretty simple as well. If your strength is 8 and your damage bonus from your melee weapon is +7, then every time you hit, you deal 15 damage. Hey, Sam, thank you so much.
Samuel Ward tipped $3. I've been catching up on your videos for the last month, and just finished the Fabula Ultima video before catching this. Got me super keen to play some FU.
Awesome. Well, Fabula Ultima is awesome, and I'm trying to get my own campaign off of the ground to do that as well. So thank you so much, Samuel Wards. So, you buy your weapons and equipment, and you can get your armor and your proficiencies. So, for example, if I had plate armor, then I have -5 damage reduction, and if I had a horse shield, a heavy triangular shield, or a tower shield, -5. If I had plate and a tower shield, I have -10, damage system. So that is 10 off of my damage. So if that person before that I was describing is doing 15 points of damage, because their strength rating is 8 and their damage rating is +7, then if they hit our plate armor wielding tower shield person, they would take off 10, and we would take 5 points of damage. Now, remember before we had our hands of cards. This is not a great hand. There we go. That's pretty good. Let's say we had 5 cards in our hand. So when you take 5 points of damage, as we just did, what we have to do is discard 5 points or more total value of cards to take the wound. And unlike before, when we were playing our cards for actions, and then we got to draw a new card back to our hand, when we play a card for damage, we do not replace it. So we just took 5 damage. If I play this 5, which absorbs the wound, then I don't get to draw back a card. So now I'm down to 4 cards. This is how hit points work in the game until eventually you take a wound and you don't have enough cards to pay the full price. So you put all your cards in and it's still not enough to absorb the damage. Now your character is unconscious, dying, and in trouble. So I'm not going to use the dragon one because that's actually confusing. So let me find a low value card here. So imagine a situation where we took, instead of maybe our armor isn't this good. So instead of taking 5 damage, maybe our armor is only -4. So we took 9 damage. Okay, well, here's our hand. So we could do this. That takes up 9 points of damage. But maybe we don't want to get rid of our 8. Well, we got to come up with 9 somehow. So we could do We could do 3 and 3 and 1. Okay, that's not good. But remember, we talked about trump. Well, when it comes to absorbing damage, there are 2 suits that are trump. One suit is helms, right? That's the endurance. That's your stamina. That's how much gumption and grit you have. But the other suit that's trump for damage is hearts, because that's how much you got a lot of heart in the fight. So both of these suits count as trump for purposes of absorbing damage. So if we took a 9 damage blow, what we could do first is play our 5 of hearts, which is trump. So that means we get to flip over the top card. Look at that. That's a 9 of helms, which is also trump. So technically we could keep flipping. And if for some odd reason we had just been hit by like a dragon and we took like a 20 damage blow, this one card trumped 5 to 9 is 14. 14 plus 8 is 22. This one card absorbs 22 points of damage. So we only had to play one card in order to absorb 22. So that would have been really big for us. But let's say that's not what happened. Oh, that would be that's actually literally crazy. So you can see that you can get these kind of fun explosive runs, which can kind of happen. That was actually kind of not planned. I shoveled that, but and then eventually you run out of cards, and that's how that is. Kilo Mike Bravo in chat says, just use the saga system. Yeah, buddy, that's what we're talking about. Kilo Mike Bravo is one of my oldest and dearest friends, and he played this game system with me for most of the late 90s. So the last thing I want to talk about saga, because there's not really a whole lot else to it beyond that, is I do want to talk about the spellcasting. Sam says, do you have to draw, or is it a choice? What do you mean, Sam? I mean, you want cards in your hand. You don't. If you trump and you don't have to flip over the top card if it's trump. I mean, like if you know that you've beaten enough and you don't want to flip the card over, you can choose not to, if that's what you're asking. Usually there's not really a price or a penalty to pay for it, but I do want to talk about the spell casting. So let me bring back up the PDF. And let's see here. Do we have the... Just looking through this PDF. Unfortunately, it's sideways. I don't know if I can rotate this. I can. Look at that. Okay. So this is like a cheat sheet that came with the game that everybody can use. So when your character has a rating for sorcery, if you have a B rating, you get to pick one school of sorcery. If you have an A rating, you get to pick 3 schools of sorcery. And the schools of sorcery are aeromancy, cryomancy, divination, electromancy, enchantment, geomancy, hydromancy, pyromancy, spectromancy, summoning, and transmutation. So if your character has a really is very proficient with sorcery, you have an A rating in your reason, you pick 3 of these at the beginning of the game. Now, Magic in this game does not use spells the way that a normal game does. You make each spell at the time you cast it. For starters, your reason, your moon, squared is how many spell points that you have. So if your character had a reason of 8, you would have 64 spell points or sorcery points. If your character had a reason of 5, you would have 25 spell points. If you had a reason of 9, you would have 81. In order to cast a spell, you must choose how long does it take to cast, which is called the invocation time. How far is the range from personal, aka just affecting you, to all the way out to artillery range, basically the farthest that anyone can shoot. A duration from instantaneous to up to an hour. An area of effect, a person, a group, an amount of time, an amount of space. And then lastly, a general spell effect, such as damage or defense or healing, or giving the intensity of the effect a numerical value. So let's build a spell. Let's cast Fireball, right? Classic D&D Fireball. Well, for the starters, if I want to cast a Fireball, my character is going to have the School of Sorcery of Pyromancy. So if I don't have Pyromancy, I can't cast a Fireball. That doesn't mean I couldn't cast a Lightning Ball if I had Electromancy, or a Frost Ball if I had Cryomancy. But if we want to cast a Fireball, we have to have Pyromancy. All right, let's start with the invocation. So the invocation, and I'm going to get my little scrap of paper here. So the invocation is, how long does this take to cast? Well, we're in the middle of a fight, and I need to throw this thing out right away. So we're going to cast this thing instantly. So that's going to be a difficulty rating of 5. Next, the range. Well, this is where we get a little bit of personal discretion. Fireball has always been a very long-range spell, but, obviously if we're fighting people and they're fairly up close, it doesn't have to be so far away. Maybe it's more of like a fire blast. But let's say that they're moderately close. So let's say that they are at near missile. And yes, this game is kind of theater of the mind. It doesn't use minis. It just uses generic terms like near missile and far missile. So near missile, our range, has a rating of 3. Next, what is the duration? Well, a fireball comes and goes in a moment. So the duration of a fireball is instantaneous. So it is 1. The damage might last, which is fine, but the effect of the fireball is instantaneous. Next, the area. Now, this is where it might be, you might describe it in terms of how many people it affects. You might describe it in how large of an area, if it's affecting a space, or you might affect it in terms of a time. Well, time isn't really important here, and presumably we're targeting creatures with our fireball. So let's say that it's a small group of people, roughly in equivalent to the area of a large room, right? A fireball. So the area is going to be a small group. That's going to be a 3. And then lastly, we have to decide the effect. And for a fireball, this is how much damage do we want our fireball to do? If we want our fireball to do 9 points of damage, it's going to be a difficulty rating of 3. If we want our fireball to do the maximum damage, which is 20, the difficulty rating is 5. Let's say we're being very, very... oh, my dogs are going crazy. Let's say that we're going for broke here, and we want the damage to be maximized at 20 points of damage. So we're going to go with a 5, a.k.a. a 20. Okay, so at this point, we have an instant spell that is range near missile, instantaneous, small group of people, and the damage is 5. So if we add that all up, we get 17. This spell has a total cost of 17. It's going to cost 17 spell points to cast this spell. But it's also going to be a DC 17 reason check to get this spell off successfully and cast it. That means if our character had a reason score of, let's say, 9, let's say we have the highest reason that you can get in the game, which is a 9 from starting characters. That means that we need to play a card that has a value of at least 8, right? Because 8 plus 9 is 17. So that means we would need to play an 8. But if we had a moon card in our hand, we could play the moon. Remember, our reason is 9, so that's 16 already. And then we flip one off the top. Well, we got 18, so we did succeed. But that card kind of sucks. So let's say we got a 5. Okay, great, cool. So 9 plus 7 is 16 plus 5 is 21. And now we can see that we could potentially cast an even more powerful spell. Now, obviously, that's easy for a fireball or for a damage spell. But the fact of the matter is you kind of use this system for everything. Because if you're healing people, you might use this table, and if it's just a generic effect, the GM just kind of wings it. You're like, this effect is hindering, irritating, troublesome, it's very, very loosey-goosey, and you really just kind of eyeball it. Now, some of my players would play a spell, would play a cast a spell, and they used to cast it all the time. So they would sometimes write it down, jot it down, just to have it kind of as a quick notification. But after a while, you got so quick and fast and used to this. My players would just come up with stuff just on the fly. The only thing is the spell effect has to match with the school of sorcery that you're casting it from. So when people talk about why does Derek not like Vancian magic, again, it's because of this system. Because I saw what a group of, we were pretty young at the time. We were still in high school. So a group of young role players with unlimited access controlled by the school could do. And we got some really, really interesting, cool, powerful magical effects. Sure, a lot of spells just got used to heal and do damage and, slow enemies and buff enemies. But we had some really fun and creative effects that I thought were really awesome to see people have that kind of flexibility. Plus, it was a spell point system, and Vancian systems can feel very constraining and very restrictive, and spell point systems gave people a lot of reach. The other thing, which I know a lot of people will complain about, is when you make a character in Dragonlance 5th Age, it's very possible that you might end up with a 4. Let's say you end up with a 5B. In sorcery or in reason, 5B. So 5's right in the middle. It's not like low, it's not super high. But a B means you get one school. So let's say I pick pyromancy. So my character has 25, right? It's 5 squared. So I have 25 spell points. I have a 5, which is not the highest. So I'm not going to be able to cast like super fire damage spells like a really powerful mage is. But my character could totally be a warrior, heavily armored, great sword. But I have this little bit of sorcery, right? Because it's not taught in schools. It just is a natural talent. It's just a natural gift. And so the last thing I want to do, just real quick, and this may not, it may be, difficult to follow along with, in which case I apologize, is I want to very quickly show you what a character creation process would look like in Dragonlance. So what you do is you shuffle up the deck, and then you deal out 12 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right. Now, you are going to assign these cards to each of the 8 ability scores. So if I assign a 7 to one of the ability scores, right? One of the, I gotta scroll out here, find the character sheet. I forgot we turned it sideways. There we go. So if I assign that, if I assign this 7 to agility, I would have an agility of 7. If I assign this 7 to reason, the moons, I would have a 7 reason, right? So the number is the number. However, what determines whether you get a rating, B rating, C rating, D rating, or X rating is the suit of the card. If I put the 7 of swords into the strength slot, which is swords, I get an A rating. If I put this 7 of swords into endurance, I would get a B rating because they're both part of physique. If I put the 7 of swords into agility or dexterity, I would get a C rating because these are on the physical side of the ability scores. And if I put this into any of the 4 stats on the right, reason, perception, spirit, or presence, I would get a D rating. The only way you can get an X rating, by the way, is if you play one of the dragon cards, which we really haven't talked about, but it's fine. There's enough going on here for you not to have to worry about it. So in other words, if I play this 7 of swords and I put it into strength, I'll have a pretty good strength, and I'll be able to use all the melee weapons in the game, including the biggest and the heaviest and the strongest weapons. So I take a look at my characters. Now, generally speaking, you're going to want to use your higher cards for your ability scores. So, if I want my character to be a really powerful melee character, I'd probably put this 9 of swords. This is the best melee card in the game into my strength. Similarly, we have this 7 of helms. So this would give us the best armor. We could use plate armor, and a 7 in our endurance isn't bad. I mean, it's the only thing higher than it are an 8 and a 9. So our character is pretty tanky, defensive, has a really nice strength, the best that you can get in the game. Now, this is shields. Now, this is also how agile our character is, but it also tells us how proficient we are with shields. If we put this into agility, we will end up being able to use all shields. So this character, if this is our agility, and this is our endurance, and this is our strength, can use all shields, all armor, all weapons, and has really good values for all of these things. Now, why not? We'll have a 6 of arrows in dexterity. So we can also use any bow in the game. But obviously a 6 isn't as good as 7, 8, and 9, but we're still pretty good shot. We're just like a hyper-focused character in melee. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any really good values for this side. Our character can have a 6 in presence, and this would make our character a pretty good leader. But we could also put this 6 into the spirit slot. If we put this 6 into the spirit slot, because spirit and presence are both part of essence, we wouldn't have a 6A, we would have a 6B. And that would mean that we would get 36 spell points, because 6 squared is 36, and we could get 1 school of mysticism. Mysticism is like the divine kind of spells. So our character could put this 6 of crowns into the spirit, get a 6B, and we could pick up a school like healing. So our character could be this heavily armored character who has the ability to heal. Now, we only have 36 spell points. We don't have 50 or 60 or 70 spell points. So, you know, we're strong, but we're not that strong. But we would have a pretty decent spellcasting capability. Similarly, we could take this 7. Now, we could put the 2 into reason, and this would give us lots of sorcery, but we'd have only 4 spell points, so we could literally never cast a spell. So this is actually a terrible decision. So we could put, let's put a 6 of swords into sorcery. We're pretty into reason. We can reason well, but we're not a spellcaster. We'll put a 3 of orbs. We have some keen senses, but we're not particularly astute. And then let's put this, we're going to save the 7, and we're actually going to put a 3 of swords here for our character's presence. Now, why wouldn't I just use the 7? Well, because we have 4 cards left, and we need to spend these cards. One of these cards is our character's starting number of quests. In other words, your character can actually start with kind of be higher level. So I want to put a 7 into my starting number of cards so that I have more cards in my hand. Then the other 3 cards get used for, one of them has to go to wealth. So wealth is how much money we have. I guess we'll put the 2 there. Our character is not very wealthy. Obviously, wealth can range from 1 to 9. And then lastly, the remaining 2 cards, which also happen to be low value, you use to create your character's demeanor and nature. So what we have to do is we have to pick one of these cards to be our demeanor, and we have to pick one of these descriptions to be our character's demeanor. That's how we act externally. And then internally, our nature is one of these. So how about we pick our nature, our demeanor? How do we act? Well, we act authoritative. But inside, our true nature is that we are merciful. And now our saga character is complete. We have a character who acts authoritatively, but is inside merciful. They're a somewhat experienced adventurer. They've already been on 7 quests and have already, have kind of gone it. So they're kind of like starting off. They're not just like some, bright-eyed kid right off the bus, but they're broke. They're not very powerful, but they are an extremely well-trained warrior, trained in all different forms of weapons, armor, shields, and bows. They're a physical powerhouse. They actually got pretty good stats altogether, and they even have a little bit of an ability to tap into mysticism. So we kind of have a kind of a paladin type character, right? Where we have really good melee and really good martial characteristics, and we have a little bit of divine magic. But we could have mixed and matched and built this character in a different way, and that is a saga character. Now this one kind of wrote itself because we got so many really good cards. But sometimes you get some different cards, and you can make some interesting choices about what kind of character class that you want to have. It's very easy to be a Gish because everything just kind of rolls together, and it takes that's the character creation process. And you would write that down on your sheet here. Here. You would write down our agility was like 8A, our dexterity was 6A, our endurance was 7A, our strength was 9A. And then we would pick a school of spirit magic, and we would go from there. And boom. Magic. Mystic, yeah. So we could pick, for mysticism, we could pick animism and give us some like animal control powers, the ability to talk to, kind of druidic type stuff. We could take alteration, which gives us the ability to shape and transmute our bodies into new forms. We can buff our stats. We can get channeling, which lets us, alteration lets us change shape. That's what I meant. Channeling lets us buff our stats or debuff our enemy stats. Healing lets us heal. Meditation allows us to buff our mental stats or debuff enemy mental stats. Mentalism is like telepathy, ESP. And then necromancy is, necromancy. Lastly, sensitivity is the ability to read spiritual auras and basically gain information about people's spiritual abilities. And then lastly, spiritualism is sort of like necromancy, but not like dark and evil. Spiritualism is like, holy light and turn undead and that type of stuff. So we could decide, like maybe as a maybe we're kind of going for a paladin vibe, and we pick spiritualism so that we can fight back against the forces of the Dark Knights and Lord Soth and all that other stuff. But we could also pick up healing and kind of have some healing abilities in our back pocket. So that is how you make a character in Dragonlance Saga. I love this system. I love this world. Now I understand that, it has some sort of like the Forgotten Realms problem where it's been changed a lot because, the different owners wanted different things, and then they wrote novels that kind of changed history. And there are some later novels where some of the stuff that I was talking about turns out, psych, it wasn't actually true. And, it's like the spell plague from Forgotten Realms, take it or leave it. Sometimes it's a good change. Sometimes it's a not so good change. Sometimes it makes for a good story. Sometimes it doesn't make for a good story. But ultimately, what makes Dragonlance great for me is it is the closest that we ever got to Lord of the Rings D&D. It is very high fantasy. It's epic. The magic is kind of all over the place. You've got knights, shining knights, riding dragons into battle against enemy dragons. Dragons. It's great. Another thing which I really like about Dragonlance is the dragons are like not as big in Dragonlance. Like normally, like we see some of these characters, the monstrous gargantuan dragons, but like in Dragonlance, the dragons don't really get much bigger than like a bus. Still very big, but not like disturbingly big. So even some of like the largest dragons in Dragonlance, except for the overlords, which is a whole other thing from Age of Mortals, but we'll skip that for a second. They're much more reasonable in their size, which I kind of really, really like. When dragons become too big, when they get like the smog size, you lose the context of how would we even fight this thing. But when a dragon is the size of like an RV or a school bus, suddenly you could imagine with a long lance, or if you were mounted on your own dragon or even a horse, you're like, yeah, maybe if I had some sort of magical thing to back me up, I could imagine fighting this thing, or me and my party could fight this thing. So I think that's one of the things I also strangely like about Dragonlance. It changed things up in, I think, a fun way. It's got some very tropey, I mean, again, between Lord of the Rings and Lord of the Rings, Earth, Sea, certain biblical things. It's just got like a lot of the classic tropes of like good versus evil. Here's the order of really good knights, and here's the order of evil knights. Oh, the Knights of Solamnia. Here are the Knights of Takhisis, and oh yes, they're evil, and it just got a lot of these very tropey things that I like. I don't need everything to subvert my expectations. I don't need everything to be like a complete outlier. Sometimes I want things to be very how I expect them to be, and I enjoy that. The art is incredible. And of course, is also, I think, a lot of people's enjoyment of Dragonlance goes back to being a young kid, reading chronicles, reading legends, reading about, maybe you're one of those people. It's very common people who just like loves Raistlin Majere. There's a lot of elements about this game that sort of, I think, harken back to that heady time of being like a 15-year-old and especially in the 90s or the 80s, and just reading these cool characters and being like, oh, that's so cool. Like Raistlin is so awesome. He's got hourglass eyes, golden skin. It's going to kill Takhisis. And Tanis is so cool. Lorelana is so hot. And then, and as I said before too, the dragons, and Dragonlances, and it's just got this like really, really, really cool. So, a lot of it, and then, it's good is good and evil is evil. And, this is a game that is very like overt, and even though the gods peace out a lot, it's it's funny, like the gods and dragons peace out a lot in Dragonlance, even though it is ultimately a game about gods and dragons. But it's very much a world of alignment, for lack of a better word, and this was made in a time when that was the thing. So also the Pantheon, I mean, we didn't really get into the Pantheon too much. The Pantheon is really nice. It's nice and tidy. Okay, there's 7 good gods, there's 7 bad gods, there's 7 evil gods, 7 good gods, and 7 neutral gods. Boom. That's it. It's 21 gods. Easy peasy. They don't have like these crazy, weird, bespoke portfolios. It's very, very clear cut. In fact, it reminds me a lot of, guess what? The Valar from Silmarillion and the Legendarium. Obviously, the Valar are all good, but like it's very easy to get your mind and wrap your head around the 21 gods of Dragonlance. So that's very nice. Orders of High Sorcery, it's like so cool. In fact, yes, Morgoth is not. That is true. Mike, Kilo Mike Bravo, who was in chat earlier, he played a sorcerer in our game named Nikolai, and Nikolai went on his test of high sorcery and had to go through the gauntlets and had to face himself and face his worst fear and prove his magical ability and prove his ability to solve problems without magic. And, he achieved the test, the test of high sorcery. He got his staff. It was a really cool moment, for us in that campaign. And it was, it was a really cool, awesome a game for us. And so I just have a lot of very, very positive memories from this game system and playing it with, my original crew. And this is us coming out of playing nothing but AD&D 2nd edition, basically. And we started playing Earthdawn, and we started playing Dragonlance. And Dragonlance was like such a departure. Earthdawn is great, but it's a pretty trad system. But Dragonlance was a very different system. Dragonlance, we weren't going into dungeons. We weren't tracking gold. Right? Gold was abstracted in this wealth sense, and our characters weren't adventuring for gold or wealth or riches. They were adventuring because they were heroes. They were adventuring to save the day against the forces of evil. So it was very, very, for us, very like narrative forward in a way that no game had ever been for us. And so for part of my bias is that but Dragonlance is like the game to do that in. Dragonlance is the world to do that in, because Dragonlance is a world of these vastly polar opposites. And I think, when it comes to big bad guys, I mean, you've got a goddess of dragons who commands evil dragons who have armies of dragon people. I mean, it's just dragons all the way down. And dragons are so cool. I mean, how can you not love a good dragon. But then you also get metallic dragons, and then you're riding them into battle. It's just like the coolest way to get high level and stuff like that. Jonas says, I just want to mention Bupa and the Gully Dwarves because they were fun stories. So Gully Dwarves are a degenerate offshoot race of dwarves, and they are famous for being incredibly stupid. And I think they can't count higher than 2. Like, they know 0, they're like, there's none. They know 1, and then anything higher than 1 is 2. If there's 27 of them, there's 2. If there's 1,500 of them, there's 2. And they're just like these really, really degenerate, almost like, they've lived in the depths of the earth. They're cursed, maybe. I can't exactly remember how they were, but Dragonlance had a lot of kind of annoying races. I don't know how to describe it. Oh, also, I will say that in 5th Age, Dragonlance 5th Age, when you built your character, you could be a human, you could be a dwarf, you could be an elf, you could be a half-elf, you could be a gnome, you could be a kender, you could be a human, but you could also be a minotaur and a centaur. So that was also like, oh, wow, look how different this game is. You could be a centaur. You could be a minotaur. By the way, if you are a minotaur, your minotaur seamanship makes any card that you play in a nautical action automatically trump. This benefits to actions at sea, such as keeping on course during a storm, or on land, such as determining the seaworthiness of a vessel offered for sale. So one of the things that classes, or roles as they were called, or races gave you, is it made all of your cards automatically trump for certain types of actions. Trump meaning when you played your card, you get to flip another one off the top of the deck and add it. And that's kind of how, races and things. And I had magical items, and we had some really cool, artifacts. And, when our campaign ended, there was a Dragonlance or 2. And Beowulf says, you lost me at Centaur. Minotaur is already really, really, really pushing it. Beowulf is just the most racist person of all time. And that's why his problem is. Kilo Mike Bravo says Gareth. Yes, Gareth was another character that Mike played during our game. Let's see if I can remember everybody. Smith, who everybody knows. Smith had a character named Krynn, who was an elven blade singer. And Mike played Gareth and Nikolai. Our good friend Justin played a dwarf named... Damn it. I don't remember the name of the dwarf. Oh, that's terrible. But I remember the name of his shield. His name of his magical shield was called Baracus, which I can remember very well. But I don't remember the name of his dwarf. Was it like... No, I don't remember the name of his dwarf. That's terrible. But that was... Nope. That was like 28... years ago, or something like that. Something absolutely insane. So it was a long time ago. But yeah, I mean that was what we played in high school. Basically, we played this game and we played Krynn. And I've read. I mean, I haven't read all the Dragonlance novels. I've read Chronicles. I've read Legends. I've read some of the later books that Weiss and Hickman wrote. I've never really got into all those sub authors who wrote all those other books about Huma and the King Priest and all that other stuff. But, I think as a gamer who enjoys the history of this game, maybe if you want something super light, super easy to read, you can't go wrong reading Chronicles, which again is the first 3 books of the Dragonlance series, and then Legends, which is Time of the Twins, Test of the Twins, something of the Twins. I don't remember the 3rd book. But those are the books that kind of really dive into the character of Raistlin Majere. Raistlin Majere is like the Steve Urkel of Dragonlance. He was kind of supposed to be like this kind of like outsider, kind of maybe bad guy ? And War of the Twins. Thank you, Jonas. He's supposed to be like this like outsider bad guy, but then everyone just like completely fell in love with Raistlin, and Raistlin was became like the mage that everybody wanted to be. I was never a huge Raistlin fan, even though I really like wizards. But yeah, It's still they're still fun reads, and they're so simple. I mean, they were written for, again, young adult fantasy. I mean, it's cotton candy for the brain at that point. So yeah, Dragonlance has this sort of very rich history. It has a lot of interesting lands. It's got knighthoods and cool new races and different spins on existing races. It's really tied into this eternal struggle between good and evil. And good always loses, or because evil always wins because good is stupid. No, but it's always just like, we're like, okay, we give up, and then Takis is like, curse, then it's like, curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal, and then like every time they beat her, she's like, oh, okay, I'm over, I'm done, and then she's like, ha ha ha, I come back, and the battle to fight evil is never won. It always goes on, ever continuing, and that's also something I think out of Tolkien as well, right? Like, they beat Melkor at the end of the War of Wrath, and that's it. We won, right? Morgoth is defeated. No, I mean, evil endured. Sauron endured all the way through the Second Age, and then they're like, we beat Sauron. He is defeated. And at the end of the Second Age, and it was like, no. Because of the ring, Sauron endures, and the ring wasn't destroyed. It was allowed to fester in the hearts of evil of men, and Isildur took it and lost it in the Anduin, and was found by Gollum, and then eventually made its way to Bilbo, and now Sauron is still around. Okay, we destroyed the ring, and now we go into the Fourth Age, but according to Tolkien, who started writing a fourth novel called The Return of the Shadow, the idea was that even in a world without Sauron, without Morgoth, evil could become a thing. So Dragonlance is kind of about that, about those repeating patterns of good and evil. That being said, I love the Age of Mortals because I loved Dragonlance Saga 5th Age. However, I think, probably the best time to set a game in Dragonlance would either be in one of the Dragon Wars during the Age of Dreams, or in the War of the Lance era. When the gods were just like when the good starts to turn the tide, when the gods return and the good dragons return and the heroes are fighting a losing battle, and there's just everyone knows about the journeys of the companions of the Lance, the heroes of the Lance: Raistlin Majer, Caramon Majer, Flint Fireforge, Tasselhoff Burfoot, Stern Brightblade, Tanis Halfelven, Goldmoon, Riverwind, etc., etc. But there's so many places throughout the world where there is a place for your characters to be heroes and to legitimately fight and win and participate in battles that make a meaningful impact to the trying to save the world from this evil onslaught that is the attack of Takhisis. So I think those are really cool. I knew Dragonlance through the lens of the Age of Mortals, and so I'm a little bit biased. But I'll be the first to admit that I think Dragonlance is at its coolest when you're dealing with the gods and the evil goddesses and all that other stuff. But, you can do a lot worse than that. Now, I think I put it away. Yeah, I think I put it in a box because I don't need this anymore. They made a Dragonlance book for 5th edition, and I bought it, and it was terrible. But, so I don't know. If you want to play Dragonlance did not have any support in 4th edition. It had one book. I don't know if I have it on my shelf. I think it also might be in a box. It had one book produced for it for 3rd edition. They made like a kind of purple cover, purpley cover to its, maybe I got it right here. They made a bunch of books. Maybe they made several books here. Here we go. Yeah, they made this book. So this book is the 3rd edition Dragonlance campaign setting book. It was okay. It covered most of the basics of what we've been talking about here. It covers, the world of Krynn, the races, the dwarves, the elves, the gnomes, the kender, the centaurs, the ogre races. But of course, obviously, this was 3rd edition D&D, so we had our classes. It talks about the deities of good, right? Paladin, Brancala, Habakkuk, Kiri Jolith, Majer, Meshakal, Solinari, that's the white moon. Chislev, Galean, Lunatari, Reorcs. Shanair, Syrian, Zivlin, Chemosh, Hidukal, Morgion, Nuatari, Sargonis, and Zeboim. Knights of Solamnia, Knights of Nerica, the geography of Krynn, all the of Ancelon, all the areas, and then here's the game. You know, the laws of the gods and the tone of it and the ruins, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty good. The 3rd edition book is good. It covers a lot of different stuff. It's got some unique creatures from Ancelon, specifically about the dragons of Krynn, special characters of note, eras of play, some sidebars and stuff. So this was a campaign setting book that actually was halfway decent. And so they did make a number of 3rd edition books for the campaign setting. However, I do want to highlight, before we leave, one of my favorite books that I own in my entire collection of all my books. And that is the Bestiary from Dragonlance 5th Age, the card game that we were just talking about. And this is the book. It is by Stan, comic book artist and former TSR employee. And the Bestiary is written kind of from a first-person point of view. It's written from the point of view of Karaman Majere, right? Who's like the fighter character of the group of the War of the Lands, and he's kind of talking about his experiences with all of these different monsters. And it is illustrated, amongst other people, by Tony DiTerlizzi and by predominantly and principally by Rebecca Guai. And if you don't know old Magic the Gathering cards, then you don't know Rebecca Guai. She's a watercolorist, and I absolutely adore her style of writing and or style of art. So the way the Bestiary is written, it's got some rules text, but then most of it is written kind of in the first person. It's got like handwritten notes from the characters, and then it's kind of written more in an almost conversational style. And then you get a stat block. And again, I should point out that stat blocks in Dragonlance 5th Age, very simple. It's an animal. Here is its coordination, physique, intellect, essence, its damage bonus, its defense bonus, and maybe it has something that it can use. But for me, it is the artwork that I love so much. The colored pencil, the watercolor sketches. I just absolutely adore every element of this book. It is one of my favorite books I've ever owned. I love this drawing of painting of the owlbear. And again, if you know Rebecca Guai, then you know her artwork it's just, for me, it's just phenomenal. I love Impressionism. I love Monet. So I love the kind of soft lines and sketchy vibe and sort of wild look to these art pieces. And I love Rebecca Guai. She's also a Magic the Gathering artist, which is where I first knew her. I knew her from Magic before I knew her from this. But anyways, this is my favorite monster book of all time. It's probably my top 5 books of all time. It's fun to read. It's written in a very conversational tone. I don't know how good of a bestiary it is, except for obviously, the stat blocks are pretty well called out. Everything you need to know to run the monster is right here. But it's a true treat. And then they also do have some other artists. There's this other artist who does some of these pencil sketches. But yeah, this book is it's gorgeous, and it's fun to sit down, and it's fun to read, and it is just a real treat. No one, in my personal opinion, does fairies like Rebecca Guai, and she did a lot of fairies for Magic the Gathering, so she definitely had her experience, and I just love it. I love the watercolor look. It's just something I really vibe with. This is, I think, a Nereid, a water spirit, or a siren or something like that. Very, very cool. I love it. It's Chimera. And then we even have, I think we have dragons too. Yeah. Here are some of those draconians we were talking about. The Aurak draconian, the Boz draconian, the Bozak draconian, the Kapek draconian, and then the Sivak draconian. There's a basilisk, a Bahir, a cockatrice, Gorgon, Naga. You know, all our normal folk that we get in the game. Ogres, goblins, no orcs. There's no orcs in Dragonlance. And yeah, so absolutely love this book. And then it's, you know, again it's written. It's actually written as if written from Karaman Measure, and he's writing to Bertram, who is the like head librarian of the like the order in the Great Library, and so then, you know, it's cataloged in the library, so it's written in this very first person way, and I think it's really awesome. And then finally, there's a, you know, more monster stuff, and there's an appendix that has every monster and all of its stats, what page it's on, and what special abilities it has. And again, this is kind of all you really need to play these monsters, because the game is pretty simplistic in that way. And then here's the monsters broken down by geography. Oh, you need a desert monster or coastland monster or forest monster. Here's all those different things broken down. So very, very awesome. Very, very cool. I love it so much. MSRP back in the day was $25. And yeah, what can I say? I like Dragonlance. Even years later, even though I didn't actually play it, they even made a hardback copy. This one I got from Half Price Books, God knows when, probably like in the early 2000s. But they did make the Dragonlance Adventures book. This was like their first attempt at like a hard copy of the campaign setting, because again, all they had published up until this point was just the adventure modules. So this is Dragonlance Adventures for Dragonlance saga enthusiasts and D&D players everywhere. Here is the latest information on the world shattered by dragons and their armies. The backgrounds for Knights of Solamnia, the Wizards of High Sorcery, Tinker Gnomes, Kender, and much more are detailed, along with their AD&D game system rules. The struggle for the fate of Krynn awaits. Man, they don't make books like this anymore. I know it's just like pages and pages and pages of text, but I can't help myself. I love it. Cool stuff. Even this is in the book. This is your moon tracking chart, so that you can track your moons. Timekeeping is of utmost importance, and no campaign setting of worth its salt is going to be without tracking time. Alrighty, well, it is 10 o'clock. Before I sign off, does anybody have any questions or comments or things that maybe I can answer for you about Dragonlance? Questions that you might have that I can maybe answer for you, maybe I can't answer for you. We're going to be back Thursday, and we're going to have another indie developer on, a guest, a member of the Patreon. Level 2 Janitor is going to be on with their game, Tactiquest, which we're going to be covering. Level 2 Janitor is also an artist and did the art for their game, so it's going to be kind of a cool opportunity to also take a look at some of their fun sketching and some of their cool little fun art projects. Kind of reminds me of some of the styles from some of the bestiary, actually. But otherwise, that we'll probably wrap up here. Before we dip out, as a reminder, I don't my time schedule might be a little bit wonky. I know a lot of people know that, but my family's dealing with the loss of my dad, and a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross. So I've appreciated all the very nice things that people have said, and obviously I haven't had to cancel any streams or anything like that, but part of that's because this is very nice for me. I mean, the rest of my days have pretty much been filled with going through his stuff and making funeral arrangements, talking with funeral homes and making cremation arrangements and all this other stuff. So being able to get on to one of these streams and just talk to you all and talk about gaming has been really, really nice. I would love to figure out why my social stream isn't working. I'll have to figure that out after the game or after the stream. Nick, question: would you ever play Dragonlance Saga again? Seems ahead of its time. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I've now played and read like 10,000 more systems than I did back then. But there's elements of this game that I think are truly awesome. And one of them is what I call input randomness. So input randomness is where randomness occurs first, aka you draw a hand of cards, and then you make your decisions. And I think that's a lot more. It's a lot more interesting and it's a lot more powerful than just rolling a die and hoping for the best. You kind of have this. It's still random. You don't get to just pick the cards in your hand, but the randomness happens before you make the decision, and you can decide. I have one really good card in my hand. Is this the time to play it? Exactly, Mike. It gives more player agency and it gives you more of a sense of control. And remember, the game was touted as a narrative, dramatic game. And so, in a certain sense, it kind of gives you that ability to decide this is a moment where my character would probably succeed. And so I'm going to play my very high card and I'm going to maybe save it for a dramatic moment. And so there's these really interesting decisions about those, when to do this and when to do that and when to do that. And so I think that it was ahead of its time. I mean, obviously, I think there's certain things about it which, and again, too, things like I talked about before, the GM did not roll any dice. The GM did not have a hand of cards. It was all player facing. So when the players were always making actions, always playing cards, and that kept them engaged. And for me, felt very quick and free. And it was very I think a lot of the development that I had as a game master in terms that would later translate into a more narrative style and a more sort of story arc, sort of thinking like a director, thinking like a editor, came from playing these game sessions because the focus was on the narrative. Now, the way that the games were structured, the way the adventures were written was very, very linear. I will fully admit that. Not a big fan of that. Nowadays we're much more into like the low prep, no prep, player go where the player's, story takes them, rather than sort of like trying to be like, let's tell this cool story and have the players kind of march in order down the railroad. So that is something that I think is problematic. It's not necessarily endemic to the game system itself, but certainly the adventures that surround it and the system were kind of designed with that idea in mind, but I don't think it's necessarily tied to that. So yeah, I would I play it again? Yeah, I think I would. I would love to bring this to like a convention. I mean, obviously this is a game that like feels it's way cooler to play it in person when you can actually have these decks of cards. God knows if you can even get these anywhere anymore. This is actually, I think, my second set. I think the first set just literally got like destroyed. But or maybe it's not. I don't know. I know I bought a second set at some point. But I'd love to bring this maybe to like a con game and everyone again really quick to make characters and then go on an adventure and just have people play with it. And it feels different. You're playing with cards instead of dice. So that's and people have not. I mean, maybe it says something that people have never gone back to this, and that TSR made this and then the company went out of business. So maybe it is a terrible idea. Awesome. All right, cool. Well, I'm going to dip out. I've got tomorrow's going to be a rough day. We got to pick up my dad remains and all this other stuff. So I'm probably not going to be around on the Discord, but you never know. But I want to again thank everybody for supporting me and just being so nice and understanding. And yeah. Thank you to Sam and Boothby and Sorrel for the super chats and tips. I really appreciate that. Alia says the cards are an instant turnoff for me personally. It's interesting. Why? I wonder why that. I wonder why so many people. Why so many people have a problem with cards. Not just cards as a resolution mechanic, by the way. Obviously, these are cards as a resolution mechanic, but even like cards as a player aid. Just like people are like, no, never in my game. It's weird that what do board games consist of? Cards and dice. And for some odd reason, people are fine with dice and they're not okay with cards. It's a very strange dichotomy. Something to be considered, something to be talked about. All right, everybody. Well, thank you again for hanging out. Thank you for exploring Dragonlance with me. I mean, there's so much more to talk about, things that we didn't get into. We didn't talk about the Knights of Takhisis. We didn't talk about the division between the Sylvanesti and the Qualinesti. We didn't talk about the Elven Civil War. We didn't talk about Cyan Bloodbane. We didn't talk about the Dragon Overlords. We didn't talk about the Discs of Meshakal. We didn't talk about a lot of things. But we covered the high points, and hopefully you got the idea of the theme and the tone around it. It was and is a very cool system, and it will always have a very fond place in my heart. I had a lot of really good memories of playing this game with my friends and throughout high school. And I will always be very fond of Dragonlance. So thanks, everybody, for hanging out with me, and we'll catch you next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody.